It is that time, quarter past the top of the hour. It's time to start Datadog's inaugural Bits of Security. This is the very first one of these events that we have ever done. So definitely, let's stay active in the chat and help me out through the day here. If you're having problems, if you want to say good things about the event, ask questions, please do that there. We'll cover that in a little bit. I'm just going to dive right into the kickoff here because we got 15 whole minutes for the kickoff. Once again, it looks like we got 77 attendees already kind of watching the webinar from locations all over the world. So that's totally great. We're so glad to have you with us. So hopefully you are seeing some slides there on screen. Go ahead and let me know in the chat. I'm looking right at the chat on the slide monitor right here. That you can see these and that I sound good and I remember to stop the music. That's the most important part. Did I remember to turn off the music because I actually can't hear it in my headphones? But we're all here for this crazy thing that we call Bits of Security inaugural event in 2021. Wonderful. I'm seeing that you're seeing the slides and we're not hearing any music. So let's just dive in here. We got a whole bunch of content programmed up for you today. This is a 3-day event, and a lot of you did register, not just for the talks today, but you registered for the Datadog on compliance happening tomorrow, or you registered for our Capture the Flag, our first ever Capture the Flag contest that we're going to be doing the day after tomorrow, Thursday. But right now, we're kind of in that introduction section. We're going to take this pretty much to the bottom of the hour. Happy to call things out. You know, if you want to just let me know in the chat there. And we've got a ton of great speakers for you, but I won't spoil it because you likely went to the site and you looked at some of the abstracts and stuff, and you decided to attend, which is great. We've also got a panel upcoming at 1400 Eastern, and that's going to be with all of our speakers plus our Chief Information Security Officer, Emilio. He's going to join us for that and kind of share some thoughts on industry direction, this thing that we're talking about today, the supply chain problem. And then we're going to have a very short product demo. So just the 6-minute long product demo. So I'd encourage you to kind of stay for that and hang out. You can ask questions of our product manager, Justin Massey. Some of you might have been to an AMA session with us before. Maybe you haven't. It's a great time to just get more information about the Datadog products and how they might be able to help you. But let's talk about housekeeping, right? So this is a Zoom webinar. It's going to be pre-recorded and available following the event, but you're already like taking the first step to have the best interaction with us here, which is that you're here live, right? Because connecting live is so hard in present times. You know I love to see the chat come in. I love when people ask questions because that really just makes the recording so much better when we actually release this stuff, because we do release the entire event. So if you ask a question, that's going to be in the recording for forever. And other people are going to benefit from those questions that you ask. So please do bring questions to any of the talks. We are all still at home, and our speakers are people too. So you might hear a dog in the background or a door shut. You know, we expect people to be people during these events. So this is not incredibly high production value recording. Feel free to post things in the chat via Zoom, and Jacqueline Verga from Product Marketing is going to be curating that chat for us, and she may decide to answer a question about the Datadog product in the chat. We may not answer it on screen, but if you do want to have a follow-up on any of that, I know I'm always happy to follow up. She's happy to follow up. And we'll have time for questions, a few at the end of each of these presentations. Just a few. Save all the best questions for that panel, because I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat and kind of moderating all day and taking your questions over for topical items for that, what we call the industry leaders panel. It's really all the speakers that we have here, because every speaker that we have is a leader in their respective field. And Emilio, our Datadog CISO, who can kind of speak to Datadog's framing of all the things. So why did we want to do this event? Why should Datadog have a security conference on supply chain and defense? Personally, I don't think that people spend enough time talking about defense and practitioner-focused defense. It's all about the red team, and so it's really nice to give some blue team time. But there's these top of mind issues that really keep kind of coming up for me personally. I think, which is that misconfiguration and detection of misconfigurations, especially in multi-tenant, multi-cloud, still really difficult for us, right? Like this is the cause of a lot of breaches. And then over the course of this year, we've continued to hear more about supply chain. So that's kind of a hot topic, top of mind. And we're really kind of experiencing a bit of a talent shortage in the industry today. It's very hard to hire people for these jobs because these are hard problems to solve, right? Like that's the kind of the reason that we're here, and no one has really solved them yet to a degree where we can be really effective a lot of the time. So the more time we can spend kind of thinking on this together, the better off we all are. So, I mean, I will say sometimes you do need to bring in external partners. It's one of the places that Datadog can help. Datadog is trying to grow in its capabilities to deliver you security solutions. And if you're already a Datadog customer, maybe you're not today, you do have the advantage that you're sending a lot of great data to Datadog that we can use to help you do security in a way that you may not have thought about security before. So please do like go take that free trial for a spin. Sign up for a free trial. You see that link. Just one more time. I promise this is the last time. I'll try and get you to sign up for a free trial today, but we can provide you some support there. Happy to chat about that. But the focus of today is really community, right? You want to hear from your broader community of thought leaders around these topics, and you know, we have some great speakers here today, and they worked so hard on these presentations, like to make them the highest quality, make them super relevant, not just for security people, but also for developers, for everyone really, because that's another big theme of doing an event like this, is to kind of bring these communities together and make security really accessible to everyone who wants to do security. It's not this scary thing that only security engineers can do. You can participate really at any level in helping your business stay safe. Just a quick note, you can still register today. You may have noticed that our reg went down for this event because we thought we had reached capacity, but we're doing this Purple Team CTF in just a couple days, April the 1st. It's not a joke. With our partner Hack the Box, who's been a great partner for the event. You'll get to go through and exploit some boxes and then kind of figure out and trace back with forensics and security alerts and logs, all the things that happened based on your series of exploits. And we're given prizes based on best write-up. So however you decide to write up how you solve the problem, and there's a lot of ways to come at solving the problem, it's going to get you hands-on with Datadog. It's going to get you hands-on with some different sets of attack tools. That is a free event. Once again, April the 1st, kick off at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Is anybody here registered already for the CTF and excited to attend it? You can just throw a chat in there. It's our first time, so we're hoping that you have the best time, but we're going to see how it goes. Then if you have questions, I see folks saying that they're in for the CTF. We have this public Slack instance, our community Slack. My Twitter DMs are open always if there's any kind of event feedback. And if you're not on either of those things, you don't want to be on either of those things, good old-fashioned email works as well. Also, I will just mention that we are hiring for all kinds of careers. So if careers is what you're looking for, and that's why you're at this event, that we have a number of jobs open both inside the security engineering organization, and also there are roles like the one that I'm presently doing, security-focused developer advocate. And so if that's of any interest, or other security engineering jobs are of interest, please do check out the Datadog careers site. Looks like I've got a couple waves here in the chat from attendees, raised hands, saying that you're in for the CTF. So if there's no questions, we'll just we can dive into this pretty early here and just kick off Our first talk of the day with Laura Thompson. Hell is other people's code.
Hello, welcome to Hell is Other People's Code. Today I'm going to talk to you about software supply chain security. My name is Laura Thompson. I'm the VP of Platform Engineering at Fastly. Fastly is an edge cloud platform, and platform engineering means I look after everything from the edge back. So today I'm talking about supply chain security. I'm going to start by telling you that this talk is not actually aimed at security professionals. It's aimed at engineers and engineering leaders who want to do a good job with security, especially supply chain security. I'm going to start by telling you what it is because not everyone is clear on that. You may have heard it being talked about with that sort of, I don't really know what that is, but it sounds like something I should be scared of. I'm going to tell you why you should care and why you should want to do something about it, and then I'm going to tell you what it is that you can do about it, even though it sometimes seems overwhelming. Supply chain security activities aim to enhance the security of the supply chain or value chain, the transport and logistics system for the world's cargo. So this is the generic definition of supply chain security that has nothing to do with software. And when you're thinking about the world's cargo, we're talking about like shipping containers, and you might have something in mind like pirates coming to intercept your cargo and run away with it, which is really not the issue that we're dealing with here, although we do obviously deal with piracy in software. Interestingly enough, if I keep reading that Wikipedia article about supply chain security, once I look at the activities that are involved in it, it starts to make a lot more sense in terms of software. So if I was thinking about cargo, I would care about things like credentialing participants in my supply chain, making sure everybody is who they say they are, make sure they know what they're supposed to be doing. Screening and validating the contents of cargo being shipped, making sure that there's nothing malicious in those crates. Advanced notification of the contents of the destination country, so you're getting things you're expecting to get. Ensuring the security of cargo while in transit via the use of locks and tamper-proof seals. Yep, that sounds like something we do in software. And finally, inspecting cargo and entry. So, okay, I'm starting to get some context here. It's good that it's starting to make sense. And here's a formal definition from GitHub of software supply chain. I want you to think broad when you're thinking about supply chain security. So a software supply chain, anything that goes into your code, every line of code, everything that you use to produce your code, from development tooling through your CI and CD pipeline until it gets deployed into production. It's as broad as you think is probably not broad enough. So that's one of the messages I want to tell you today. Okay, so I'm going to try and explain the threat model in a very generic way. When we think about security, we might think of, our company as a castle. And the traditional thing that you might think about as an engineer when you're thinking about protecting against security threats or attackers is you're thinking about enemies at the gate. There's a couple other things that you might think about if you're a little bit more sophisticated further down the path in terms of thinking about security. Hopefully you're worried about insider threat. And that is somebody inside the castle who opens the gates and lets the enemy in. Supply chain threats in this context are, someone who has poisoned the well inside the castle, or, infused the grain with ergot or something so the army can't fight. And that is really what we're talking about when we're talking about supply chain threats. So what does that mean, and why is she talking about pirates and castles? So examples of this would be things like third-party open source libraries, which we almost all use, right? More than 80% of software out there has some kind of open source in it these days. It might be any tools or software as a service that is used in your software, to host your software, to produce your software, or to monitor your software. So that includes continuous deployment, includes source code hosting, includes monitoring tools, observability tools, any of those kinds of things. It also includes things like the infrastructure, the hardware that your software runs on. What is the firmware that's running there? What is the operating system? What is the kernel that you're using? It also means the security of any signing keys that you may be using, which I'll talk about later. So it's basically turtles all the way down. You need to worry about security at every level of the stack. So sometimes it's said in the open source world that we stand on the shoulders of giants. But what do you do if the giants are untrustworthy? The question you might be asking yourself is, why should I care? This all sounds like something very vague and hand-wavy, and I don't see that I can care or do anything about it. I'm usually some stories. I always think the best part of security engineering is the stories we get to tell. Okay. So one way of thinking about this whole concept is don't ship malware. This came up. I once worked on a project with Richard Barnes, who is a crypto enthusiast, as he described himself. He used to be a principal engineer at Mozilla, where I worked with him, is now at Cisco. And we had this project where we were trying to look at all of our systems and try to figure out where the cracks between things might be. Where were the overall risks, the weakest points? Where was it brittle from a security perspective? And explaining this to people was really hard. There wasn't a good elevator pitch for it. People would be like, I don't understand what you're doing. It sounds very broad. And at the end of the day, it came down to this aim of like the software that we produce, that we ship to end users, shouldn't be malware and shouldn't contain malware. So don't ship malware. There's actually stickers of this somewhere, very unofficial, going around. Okay, so let me tell you a story to motivate this. This is actually not really, strictly speaking, a security story, but it is a supply chain story. You may remember a few years ago now, there was some problems with LeftPad. This is back in 2016, so about 5 years before I'm giving you this talk. LeftPad is a small node module. There's 11 lines of code. And actually, if you look at this slide, you can see the text of the code there. It's really short, right? Like this, it does very little. And what happened was that the person who made this library had, a problem actually with one of their other libraries, a disagreement, and they were upset about it, and they pulled down all of the libraries that they worked on, including this one, which was actually not the one that was contentious. What happened then was that thousands and thousands and thousands of software projects broke because they were all depending on this thing existing. And when it didn't exist anymore, we had real problems. So that probably should have been an omen that people paid attention to. But, we tend to go, wow, that was really bad, and I'm glad that wasn't me. Or, that was me, and that was really annoying, but it's fixed now. And, I've replaced that 11 lines of code, and I don't need to worry about it anymore. 2 years later, in 2018, we had this problem with Event Stream. So this is a long and complicated story, but Event Stream is, in fact, another node library. And the person who was the open source maintainer had somebody else volunteer to contribute to it. And the person who was contributing pulled in another dependency. And at some point, that other dependency was replaced with malware, which meant that the malware ended up in Event Stream, and it ended up in all of the code that uses Event Stream. This is really, really scary at this point. Because at this point, you have someone way up the value chain has introduced malware, and now it is running on hundreds of thousands of computers worldwide. I like that the issue here is I don't know what to say, because that is how you would have felt in this situation. Okay, more recently, as recently as December, you probably saw stories about this because it was everywhere. This had a really high impact across a lot of really well-known companies, a lot of really well-known governments. But a particular tool was used to compromise multiple victims. And somewhere along the line, the code for this tool had been infiltrated with malware, believed to be from state actors, which is, if you're not in security, means like people from other governments. This is really bad for obvious reasons. Okay, but you'll see there it says it leverages supply chain to compromise multiple global victims. From the point of view of an attacker, it's very desirable to do a supply chain attack because of the amount of leverage that you have. Instead of spending all day attacking one company, if you attack the supply chain, you then get for free access to all of the companies downstream from that. Okay. If you deal with this on a day-to-day basis, you might say something like, well, but there's this repo of CVEs, over at MITRE, they keep track of them all. It's in a database. And when one of these things happen, like this one, which is, a CVE in Kubernetes, I might, somebody from my security team will ping me and say, hey, you need to upgrade Kubernetes. And that's really it. I don't really see why that's such a big problem, right? Great, problem solved. The thing that often happens, though, is that real world basis, you get a little ping on Slack and it's your boss saying, I saw this media article about a software problem in this third-party tool or third-party library. Are we affected? How easy would it be for you to answer that question right now? Do you know every tool that's used everywhere in your organization? If it's an organization of one and you're the only person that works there, maybe you do. You maybe haven't thought about it. You might not know all of the software that's running on your laptop. You might not know all the software that's running on, wherever your software is hosted, if it's running in a third-party location like in a cloud. You probably don't know where all the pieces that make up your operating system came from. So you probably don't know if you're affected off the top of your head. And that's really scary. So when you start to think about it like that, your boss coming and saying, are we affected? And you can't even answer the question. Like, it's not as simple as patching the thing. You don't know what it is to patch. You don't know where to patch it. You don't even know if it's in your code or somebody else's code. So at this point, it starts to seem like a garbage fire, right? An unavoidable disaster of truly epic proportions. This is a garbage fire and a garbage truck that's going at high speed towards an even bigger pile of garbage. So before we talk about what we can do about it, let's think about how this even happens. How do we get here? So there's kind of three main points that I want to make to you today. One is that the first way that these kind of supply chain attacks happen is through indirect approaches. which means that something upstream of you has a vulnerability, right? So maybe it's a vulnerability in your operating system. Maybe it's a vulnerability in your node library. It doesn't really matter what it is. And that is something that has yet to be exploited, right? So that is something that could be exploited, but you don't know if it has been. The second kind of attack is a direct attack. So this is somebody who has deliberately implanted malicious code upstream from you. They are hoping that it will get to you and cause a problem for you, or that it will give them access to your systems, right? Whether that be the data that you're storing, that belongs to your end users, or to your code, your IP. Maybe it's access to the video cameras in your data center, right? Like that is the intention there. Someone has planted malicious code and is hoping that they will get some effect from it. The third thing here is that, as well as sort of indirect vulnerabilities and direct attacks through the supply chain, you want to not be the person that's responsible for this. At the end of the day, when CVE comes out, you don't want it to be in your software. If you are seeing some press release about, here is this third-party tool that caused, vulnerabilities in lots and lots and lots of websites, you don't want it to be your fault. So these are kind of the three threats that we need to think about and how we would mitigate these. So when I say upstream, what do I mean by upstream? I mean things like third-party vendors and suppliers of all kinds with physical or virtual access to software. So when I say suppliers of all kinds, what do I mean? So think about your data center. Even if you are using a cloud provider, there's a data center somewhere. As we say, the cloud is just another word for somebody else's computer. And somewhere in that cloud, there is a data center with a computer in it. Who has access to that computer? Is it in a well-secured cage? Can anybody from the janitorial staff all the way up through software engineers who are SSHing into boxes access it? Right? There are a lot of people who can touch the software that you're using. Do you trust them all? Who are those people? How can you trust people when you don't even know who they are? What else is upstream? Any kind of software that you're purchasing from suppliers, any kind of hardware you're purchasing from suppliers, those actual computers that you bought that come with firmware installed on them. Do you trust the people that wrote that? There's all of the open source libraries. You have slightly more direct control over that, but it still starts to get combinatorially complex very, very quickly. Your data storage providers. And once you start thinking about it like this, and you're like, I have to worry about somebody that is sweeping the floor in the data center on like some part of the country, I don't even know where it is. Can I trust that person? And the answer is you can't. The list is endless. And this is a point where people sometimes start to freak out. So if you haven't started freaking out, here's some things that'll make you freak out a little bit more. Some scary numbers. These are from GitHub's annual Octoverse report. So if you look at the right-hand side, they have done an analysis of all of their repos and show you what percentage of the repos in each of these languages rely on open source libraries. And what you can see just from glancing at it is that more than 80% of most applications code is from the dependencies. So most of the code that you have is not the code that you wrote, it's the code that somebody else wrote. So for example, if I think the average here for a node repo is that there will be on average 683 average transitive dependencies. And by transitive, I mean not just the libraries that you include, but the libraries that those libraries include and so on. Okay, so now you're scared. Don't be scared. That's, not super productive. It's good as a motivating force, but you have to turn that fear into doing something constructive. So I think the very first step is to map the territory, monsters and all. I love these old sea maps that show, there's a sea monster here and there's a sea monster there. Sometimes I think of this as here be dragons, right? So the very first step to take is know what you're dealing with. There's just some basic advice here. Is really you need to take an inventory of what it is that you have. The thing to remember here is security is always a process. This won't be done. Even if you sit down and make a list of all the things that are components, first of all, it's going to be very long. And second of all, it's going to be changing. It'll be out of date before you even finish it. One of the things that's important is to realize that thinking about it as a whole system is fundamental to any kind of success here. So think about all of the components of the system and how they interact. And probably most importantly is try to think what the threat model might be for your company specifically. If you make software that ends up on the computers of end users, then somebody that's attacking you is hoping to get access to the machines of those end users. If you are a software as a service provider, then they're hoping to get access to your customers, access to you. If you work for someone that has really interesting data, right? What are the things that those people are coming to attack, and what is the way that they are most likely to attack it? The more you understand the threat model, the easier it is to defend against it, because you're not just trying to defend against everything, because that is insurmountable. Okay, so first we talked about direct upstream attacks. In order to mitigate these, there are a few things you can do. A lot of it is around what I would describe as vendor qualification. So when you are actually paying somebody for software or hardware or firmware or whatever it is, You should make sure that you have security requirements in your request for proposals and any contracts that you have. So at least you have some kind of legal protection. You should vet and qualify the vendors. And you can do this by doing sort of a security questionnaire, looking at the vendors' practices and so on. There are, on NIST's website, there is a pretty good checklist of things that you should ask a vendor about. The third thing is you have to be willing to replace a vendor. If somebody has ongoing problems, be prepared to switch. I think that's really important. Or if you are going down sort of this purchasing path and somebody isn't passing qualification, then start looking at other vendors. And finally, track the provenance of everything that you use, right? Make sure you know have an inventory of all the things that are used in your software, and keep that up to date. In terms of indirect attacks, again, know what you have, including those also ephemeral transitive dependencies. Make sure you keep up with patches. So for all the things you have, patch when there's a CVE, patch when there's not a CVE. It's really important to have like a regular cycle for patching. If you work for a big company, it'll be for compliance reasons. If you don't work for a big company, make sure you're patching operating systems, libraries, languages as often as possible. Maybe it's a weekly cadence, maybe it's a 30-day cadence. And obviously when you have security problems, you would patch them on the day if you could. The other thing is, as you get these controls in place, at the beginning, you're hoping to go from sort of auditing and monitoring what's in the supply chain and making sure that it's keeping up to date to some kind of actual enforcement, and that could be through process or tooling. Finally, the third big thing is don't be the entry point for malware. This is just general adherence to good security practices, but specifically around your code pipeline. So here are some examples of things you can do. One thing that I've had good success with in the past is using a two-person rule. And that can be a two-person rule for access to systems, for example, getting into a data center cage. It can be two people required to commit code. So what I mean by that is that something must have passed code review from a second person before it can be committed. Again, something pretty easy to enforce the tooling. For deploys, it is good to have somebody to ask for the deploy and somebody to approve the deploy. If you want to go like fully down the path that sort of the financial industry has, is you can enforce that those two people are not in the same management chain, which is harder to do. And I would only suggest going that far if you had sort of extremely sensitive environment. You want to make sure you have authorization for all of these things. So not just two people, but two people who are on the right ACL, like that are allowed to do those things and that they've had to log in to do them. And an audit trail, so you know who did what and when if you have to track something down afterwards. One thing that I see that people often fall down on is use of internal tools. People sometimes have very good security around their production systems, but they're like, oh, well, that's just the CI pipeline. It doesn't matter that the operating system is 9 months out of date or 3 years out of date or whatever it is. But honestly, they require the same attention to detail as production systems. You might think they're not public facing, but if somebody has entered your systems, it would be better if they were in fact up to date and not vulnerable to those kinds of problems. In general, basic security principles like limiting sideways movement between systems. So if somebody comes in, through the front door, they shouldn't be able to easily get into your release pipeline. You have to think about things like code signing, like this code came from me, so that people can verify that it's not from somebody else and it hasn't been tampered with. And whatever other appropriate use of crypto is appropriate for your environment. So to summarize, in any kind of security problem, there's never a magic bullet, right? You can't. I think sometimes people are like, I wish I could just buy a piece of software as a service that would solve this problem for me, track all my dependencies and update all my software and deal with it for me. There are some tools that will help with dependency tracking, but as we've discussed, that's really only one piece of the puzzle. So what you really need to do to approach this problem is just have an accumulation of good practices. Track your dependencies, have good code hygiene, have good visibility to what it is you have, make sure your developers have good education on how to produce secure software, and keep doing those things over time, and it will get better. Probably if I could leave you with one key takeaway, make sure you think deeply about what the threat model is for your environment, and understand that and protect against those things first. That's it from me. Thank you for joining me.
All right, that was a great talk. First talk of the day, all kicked off. So we'll just kind of wait for Laura to decloak here on video. We've got Laura. Hey, Laura. I'll go ahead and unpin myself here so that we can have equal screen time. We got a lot of great questions for you. Thanks, by the way, for putting that together. I remember when I first asked you to participate in the event, I asked you for a keynote presentation, and this basically is like the keynote
Oh, good. It worked out all
that I
right.
always wanted. So it worked out super,
I'm glad.
super good, even though we didn't call it a keynote. It's aimed at engineers, which I think is very, very cool, and not just like security folks. I think you do a great job of like really making the concepts accessible and also like talking about intangible non-tech concerns, which I don't
Right.
think that we hear a lot about.
Well, do you want me to go through the questions, or do you want to
Let's. Well,
tell me
I'm
what we do
happy
first?
to. I'm happy to field
Cool.
them in order here. So the first one
Yeah.
that we
Okay.
have is from Alejandro,
Mhm.
which is, what do you think about the CI/CD pipeline as a way to automate the inventory of libraries?
Actually really like that idea. There's a bunch of different tooling around it, and I have built my own here, or had a team that built our own. There's also some pretty good stuff in GitHub that you can use, like the dependency tracking there. But I think the appeal of the CI/CD pipeline is that everything goes through there, right? Except of the stuff that you're actually sort of building. It obviously doesn't cover the third-party stuff if you're using software as a service, for example. But anything that goes into your build process will be covered, and that seems like a pretty good place to inventory that to me. Don't forget to think about the security of the CI/CD pipeline itself, though. So,
Yeah, I think we consistently see things move into CI/CD where there's a belief that there's no way to change things outside of the
yeah,
pipeline, and that turns out not to be true.
it's absolutely not true, right? I think there's always room for improvement, and I think that I mentioned code signing and stuff at the end. I think one of the things that can happen is, you generate an artifact that you're really happy with security of, and then somebody replaces it with something else, right? And that's a problem too. So
Yeah,
it's end to end that you got to think about here.
yeah. So many garbage trucks.
Yes.
There's so many quotable things in this presentation, and I love how honest some of these analogies are. Given the choice between improving the code and improving the software supply chain, which would you go after first? And maybe this isn't an
Yeah.
order question, but what's more effective as a starting
Yeah.
point?
It's a great question. And I think I started answering it in the chat, but I figured I would sort of ramble about it a little bit here as well, which is the answer is always that depends. When someone says like, what's better, A or B? And I'm sorry, because that's like a terrible answer. But I think it generally depends. If you already have like a pretty good security program in place, you audit your code, you have sort of good code review and security review and all that kind of stuff, then I would look to supply chain, because the leverage is huge, right? Like if you are shipping code to thousands and thousands of users and you have a problem in your supply chain, then the amplification effect is huge. And this is why supply chain attacks are popular, right? Because it's like an accelerant for any attack that you want to make. So sorry for the non-answer, but it depends on where you are in your security journey.
Yeah, I think it could be so nuanced for most people depending on their threat model. And you talked a little bit about threat modeling, but you just
Yeah.
want to kind of touch on what threat modeling really is for software, like just one
Yeah.
sentence.
Well, that's a great question. Oh, I could talk about it slightly longer than that if that would be all right. Stop me
Oh,
if I
sure.
get boring.
We've got
Um,
time. We've got time.
Good, cool. So I think threat modeling is actually really poorly understood by people outside security. Um, One of the best ways to understand it, I think, is not so much as threat modeling as thinking about it in terms of adversarial thinking. I was really lucky a few years ago to take part in an adversarial thinking workshop. And I think part of the thing is that people who don't have a day job in security are like, well, no one would ever do that. You have to ask yourself, what are people doing? Why would they attack it in such a way? What would be their goal? What would they hope to get out of it? And that helps you to model like what might actually go wrong. I think without thinking about what the threats and attacks really are on your particular scenario and environment, then you can end up with a kind of cargo cult security where you're like, oh, I will like buy several products from security vendors and I will rub encryption on everything and then I will be okay. But you actually have to think about like, what is the model? Like, why would somebody come after me in this way? So, thinking about some of the things I mentioned in the talk, let's imagine that I am some kind of government department. What are the model there? Like probably it's about sort of data exfiltration. People are interested in getting hold of the data that I have. It's not about necessarily sort of a financial attack or a DDoS or whatever. It's probably about data exfiltration. So what are the things that people might do to get at that data, right? And then model what you're thinking about there. So this is a really important thing to think about. And if you can, I know people who work in security professionally do this already, but just become really paranoid. Always, when you're looking at something, always think about how could this go wrong, right? Like it's actually a good skill in any kind of ops role, to be honest, not just security.
We're getting a lot of positive comments coming back in. One of our other speakers says 100% agree with you. And I know personally I talk a lot about risk assessment because it's something that has been going on in the insurance industry forever, and it seems to be kind of relatively new to cyber, kind of popular in the last decade or so. Heather asked a great question here. Are there any tools that help you make a threat model? Are there any frameworks that you like or tools that you use or places to start?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's been written about this. It's not really a tool thing because I think it's more of a process and it's a thought process. But there are sort of good models that you can use, and there's been tons written about this. Do you have a favorite, Andrew?
I like the Mozilla Rapid Risk Assessment framework, not necessarily for threat modeling. So as you may be aware, it was created as a response to how long and heavy threat modeling can be, but it has a lot of the same components of like what could go wrong and kind of scale scoring. And we have other talks on that, but that's kind of my favorite tool.
That's cool. Yeah, anything where we can do some kind of heat map too, where you're saying what are the things that are most likely to come under attack. You probably don't want to apply the same effort everywhere, right? So that's part of what you're thinking about there. And yes, as you say, that framework's good and it's freely available, which is nice too. So
there's kind of a few questions here that are along the same theme, which is like basic Git flow stuff, and then also when do you lock dependency versions versus not? Like when do you err on the side of like always patch versus kind of the trend that we're seeing, which is like kind of following Ruby gems lock file standard.
Yeah, so effectively pinning things. Again, the answer is it depends. So I think if you have good practice around patching and if you are able to patch stuff downstream easily, sometimes depending on what you're doing, you may find that your downstream customers are not willing to update very frequently, right? Like people get into this whole, oh, well, I don't want change in my environment, or I can't do it for compliance reasons. And there's sort of this balance between, wanting to update frequently and not. So pinning is a challenge because you can be updated to a vulnerable version or you can be stuck on a vulnerable version. And that's sort of the trade-off you make there. It's reasonable to pin depending on your environment. But again, the answer is very much, it depends. Think about what you're doing, think about your risk tolerance level and your tolerance for change. So, in some environments, it's like for us, where I am right now, it's, we will apply security patches within 24 hours, right? That's kind of what we're trying to do there. And some places like, well, we will not upgrade our software more often than every 30 days. So, it really depends on where you are.
But I'm sure you do that based on severity, right? Like the SLA of the patch lifecycle is always based on potential impact.
Yes, exactly. Yep, absolutely. Yes, and I want to say that within 24 hours, that's for, the more severe problems.
Yeah. We have a couple of other questions, which is like, what should developers be doing to clean their libraries in the first place? Like, how do I know that I have patched code in here?
Oh, this is funny actually, because it's like kind of the great mythology of open source, right? Is like more eyes on things is more secure. And that's somewhat true, but honestly, I think that if anyone that's ever written a complicated patch knows that you submit a 10-line patch for something and it will have like 7 comments. And if you submit a 20,000 line patch for something, you'll get like R+ looks good. So that's kind of the essential problem with it. In general, if you can use things that are broadly used, that gives you a level of protection, right? Because more people have looked at it. Or things that are supported by a vendor, right? Like if there's some kind of third-party support, especially when you're in a corporate environment, it's always nice to have somebody you can ask when you need help. It is, yeah, and I think just generally looking at sort of who is making this and how much do I trust them, right? The same questions you would ask about anything else.
Yeah, I think we've been sort of duped on that as well, because we've seen really big projects kind of like fly under the radar and get very little actual security review.
Right, exactly. And you never really know. I mean, it's very hard to judge from the outside how well something does on security. Sometimes you find out afterwards, like, there's these horrific practices and it was really not what you expected, which is why you try to do that sort of vendor audit and vendor approvals when you are engaging with a new vendor. In open source, it doesn't really help you, but, reputation is probably your best bet there.
Do you use your own sort of checklist for vendor review? Like, do you have your own kind of guide posts there?
We do. There's actually also a really good checklist on the NIST website, which I would refer you to. I'm happy to provide that URL for anybody, like just a list of, here's a bunch of starting questions for vendors. And it's very comprehensive, so you may not want all of those things, but it's something to look at as a starting point.
Great. I had no idea that NIST was providing guidance on third-party vendor audit.
Oh yeah, it's just like, here is like a starting list of questions. I'm happy to provide that URL later. Sheandra, I don't have it.
Yeah, throw it in the chat.
Obviously.
Throw it in the chat.
Yeah, I will.
For sure. Or during the panel, we can talk about this again.
Yeah, I'll dig it up between now and the panel, I think. That's good.
Yeah. Lots of good chats coming in on third-party libraries, third-party scanners.
Yeah, dead projects. I think Heather makes that point of like ones that haven't been updated recently. Yes, if you are looking at an open source library and nobody's updated it since 2016, you should probably run away. Right?
Yeah.
That's really good advice.
Open source project health continues to be a moving target in 2021.
So. Yep, absolutely.
Well, with that, if there's a
question about that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, did you see another question that you'd like to address?
Yes. What do you think about the openssf.org initiative? I actually haven't spent much time looking at this, so I probably should spend some more time looking at it. I was just going to say it looks really interesting. I have the NIST URL, and I'm going to drop that in the chat before we finish up, if that's okay. I did find it in my browser history. There you go.
There we go. Supply chain risk management documents, workshop brief on cyber supply chain best practices.
As I said, it's super comprehensive. Like, you probably, unless you are working in like a SCIF, you probably don't care about half the stuff on that list, but it's comprehensive and it's a good place to start. So yeah.
I'm sure a lot of folks don't know what a SCIF is here.
Oh,
you want to give me your 30-second summary of what a SCIF is?
Oh yeah. Let me see if I can remember what it stands for. It's like secure, compartmented information facility. So if you're doing government work, like it's basically like a clean room that you go into to work, and you don't take any like software or hardware in, and you don't take any software or hardware out. And a lot of folks, I live near DC, so a lot of folks I know work in those on a day-to-day basis. So
yeah, I always thought of it as a kind of a fire safe with a fax machine inside or something.
Right. Yeah. It's but yeah, the sort of the bane of a lot of people's existence, especially during the pandemic. Like, people have had to go into work because they can't work from home. So
sure. Well, we're just about at time here, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks again for being with us. Thanks again for the hard work on the talk. Cool. It was great. Very, very accessible presentation. We'll see you back here for the panel in just a little bit.
Cool. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the rest of the talks. Bye.
All right, we're moving right along here, staying right on schedule. Next up, we have Laurent Tall from SNCC, who's been very active in the chat. We'll get him promoted to panelist here very shortly. Oh, there, it just happened. Things happen when you ask for them, and we're going to air his talk, Stranger Danger, Finding Security Vulnerabilities Before They Find You. Thanks for being here, Laurent.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. How's it going? Are we ready for that one?
I think we are. I think this is a great deep dive now into some super technical bits after Laura's kind of 30,000-foot overview of all the risk. We're going to dive into one specific ecosystem, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so let's do it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining my talk, Stranger Danger, Finding Security Vulnerabilities Before They Find You. My name is Laurent Tall, and I'm from SNCC, where we build developer-friendly security tools to help developers fix issues in projects they're building with open source. I'm also actively involved in the Node Security Working Group as triaging vulnerabilities and helping find and bring this awareness to developers, as well as other related security activities like the OWASP project and basically being an activist around web application security. I'm happy to join you today and talk about how awesome open source is. We're all using it in one way or another. Some of us are maintainers, some of us are consumers, some of us just contribute one-offs or maybe regularly to open source projects, and this is great. We have open source as basic building blocks for us to build software. And today, nobody would probably question the fact that open source has made an incredible, significant impact on modern software development and continues to expand every year. 1.4 million packages on NPM kind of vet this story for us. Actually, today, maybe 1.5 million already. So this is growing, year after year, and we're seeing it across ecosystems. it is even growing. Open source new packages getting added to the registry while we are installing open source packages. It's incredible. But really, how much do we know about open source packages, about the dependencies that we use, about the maintainers who actually use them, and do anything from basically security testing, or do they not do security testing? What about the maintainers that add dependencies? Do we test those, those packages and all of those things that stem from it? So as you can imagine, there's a lot that we may or may not know in open source dependencies. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, about this software supply chain security ecosystem where we are part of. In fact, there's really an interesting article just coming off on October 2020. This is when this was published. A paper by basically the Cyberspace Solarium Commission that was talking about this exact problem, about the fact that it calls for a center for open source software security to test vulnerabilities in open source software repositories, which serve as the foundation for most of today's software. And this is an acknowledgement that was officially and formally greeted in this paper, basically acknowledging the fact that we're all dependent on open source. This is an entire supply chain issue, and we're all impacted by it. So we should do something about it. We should raise the awareness and treat it with the exact risks and concerns that we should. So moving on with this to another research paper, which has actually pointed out an interesting fact. It found that for every average npm install you are doing, you'd be pulling in more than 4 levels deep of dependencies. So this is actually just showing us how much we are dependent on open source software, in some ecosystems more than others. That same research paper had actually pointed out other highlights. This other one is that they found that 61% of all of npm packages could be considered abandoned. Now, what exactly does abandoned packages mean? I have no idea, but what we're learning from this is based on a categorization that if a package did not receive release in the last 12 months, it could be considered abandoned. That is, pretty much how they found it out. And honestly speaking, you could argument that maybe a package has been mature, maybe a package, made it to feature complete. Except, maybe the reality is a bit different. And 61%, more than half of packages on npm, for example, that could have been considered abandoned, that's pretty high anyway. Even if we could, consider some of these counter arguments. So let's see, what happened related to a package that could have been considered an abandoned package. We have the event stream incident. Event stream is a package, maintained by Dominic Tarr, who is a member and friendly user of the open source community on npm JavaScript. And event stream has been a package that has been there since 2011, so almost a decade. It practically did not even receive any new releases in the last 2 years to this incident happening. By the way, this incident is not related to event stream as a malicious package itself, but rather another package, which was flatmap stream, which was malicious. But how did flatmap stream got and related into event stream? So suddenly, out of the blue, for this event stream package in open source project, being built on GitHub, suddenly a person shows up, right? And they offer to fix some issues, and they open issues themselves and add a new PR that fixes them and so on. And Dominic has a lot of other things that he's doing, 400, 500 other packages that he's maintaining. So this person coming in and offering to help with event stream that receives millions of downloads a week, this is actually pretty great. And this is the story of open source, isn't it? So that person continues to basically promote new more PRs and basically contribute more and more. And one of those contributions have been to add a package called flatmap stream for a specific functionality into event stream. So let's take out whatever code we wrote and put it into a reusable third-party package, and then add that into the dependency tree of event stream. Now, so far so good, except that person also controls this flatmap stream. So few weeks down the lines, that person actually adds a malicious code into flatmap stream that is doing something nasty for specific developers, which I'll get to in a second. But the moment that we are incrementing a version of flatmap stream, specific version ranges of event streams that would get installed will now pull in this new version of flatmap stream. So if prior versions have been reviewed, that's fine. But if that last version of the dependency of flat map stream, which is now malicious, is not reviewed, that's a problem. And all of this is happening in the public eyes, right? This is public open source. Anyone could look at it, but we failed to find it as a community. We failed to find it, fast when it happened. Now, what exactly happened, or what is that malicious code that was in flatmap stream? So interestingly enough, the event stream incident as a whole was just a way to get into a different project. What happened is, that group, that person who had, orchestrated this entire thing for event stream had actually targeted developers building a Bitcoin wallet application from a company called Copay app. This is the app that they targeted. And because that application was, kind of like orchestrated and worked in the open, you could have seen which packages are being used by developers there and in which stage. Like, event stream was part of the build stage. So that malicious package, when it was installed, npm as a package manager allows packages to run scripts. So when it was installed, would have run any flatmap stream related code. And so all of that kind of trickles back in and forth. And what we have now is a malicious version of event stream, because it is pulling malicious versions of flatmap streams unknowingly, but knowingly to one person who orchestrated all of this. And this has been going on for 3 months until it was ended with 2 versions released by the Copay app that were including this malware to steal Bitcoin from wallet applications from users, basically, until we found it, which is, by the way, just because someone had raised an issue related to this thing, all of it happening. So, this is a story of a potentially abandoned package by that research that ended up really being and affecting, being malicious as the outcome of this, and really impacting all of us, millions of users who were impacted by this. So here is a mental exercise, right? By this point, you're building an application, could be a Java, Go application, Rust, whatever is your thing, maybe Node.js. And your mental image of this application is the following blob, right? It's this big blob where you're building this app and it does one thing or the other and so on. But really, the reality is a bit different. What we're actually building and writing our own code is a significantly smaller portion of that entire application code. So our mental image of our application is actually this composition of open source packages and code that we're using that is community powered and built by me, you, everyone else, basically, right? Everyone who are citizens on open source. And we're leveraging this. This is amazing, but we need to understand and keep an eye on this risk, because this is the reality of what's happening. Now, it's one thing to say, let's keep an eye on open source packages and understand the risks and track them. And it's a different thing doing so. Why? Well, it is hard to imagine building anything without open source dependencies, right? The thing is, dependencies use also more dependencies themselves. So, managing dependencies for a project is an important task, and it requires due diligence and it's a hard task, but it is completely different in terms of managing a tree of dependencies that you get with some ecosystems. So what we're seeing here is this chart from the State of Open Source Security Report that shows us for projects that were scanned with Snyk, what we could tell, in aggregate for users is, if you look on, the right part of that chart, you could see some ecosystems like Maven, like Ruby Gems, like NPM, in which when we find security vulnerabilities, when users scan their projects, we actually find them in indirect packages. So mostly these are packages that even you as a user are, as a consumer of building a project and consumer open source packages, you're not really in control of those packages, of those versions. There are maintainers of the direct dependencies that you add that are, in somewhat control of those, depending where they are on that tree. So you could see how really complicated this case of understanding where vulnerabilities come from, and of course mitigating this problem and finding, that least less of resistance route of finding, which one to upgrade, and what if you can't upgrade? Maybe you need to patch it. So all of this thing is part of what we should kind of consider. So moving on with other examples of malicious packages, what could possibly go wrong with indirect dependencies, right? Well, here's a timeline of security incidents that stemmed from malicious, attempts. Some of them were to backdoor projects, steal credentials, steal your API key, steal your token for NPM, still different things. We talked about event stream as one of them. But there was another one that is, it's really curious to take a peek and understand, what is the impact of malicious packages, because the fact that anyone could maybe submit tomorrow morning a malicious package into a repository like NPM, that's one thing. But getting that package into millions of users is another thing. So let's see what happens with one of them. Let's talk about the get cookies. A package was built, a couple of years back. You would think that this, is a package to help you basically work with cookie data in one way or the other, but maybe it's not, let's say. In fact, actually, it is nothing less than a command and control backdoor that has been built with the sole purpose of allowing anyone, remote attackers, to basically send and create remote code execution on any web server, any Node.js web server that is bundling this dependency and using it as a valid Express middleware for their applications. Well, how does it do it? How does someone gain access? Well, if you have a route that is exposed over HTTP, what this backdoor does is it basically, as a middleware standing there and on the Express middleware stack, it's basically able to look at any requests coming in, and based on HTTP headers, what it does is it parses the data that got sent to it, and then one of the commands that you could send is, clear the data, make some room for more code to get you to go in. Then, load the code. The second request of the HTTP, that you would be sending as a malicious actor here would be to, run some JavaScript. That last command would be, execute that piece of JavaScript that I just sent right into the buffer, loaded it there, just execute it, basically run, evaluate it on the server side and run it and execute it on the Node.js web server. So this is what this command and control backdoor did. But the thing is, having one package is, who's gonna find get cookies. But having 3 packages is still who's gonna go and find HTTP fetch cookies or express cookies if they have 5 downloads or 20 downloads or maybe more. But it's still very less. Certainly on a repository or registry like NPM that has 1.5 million packages. Well, what can we do? So we find another package that we can compromise. We can basically create an account takeover, like Mail Parser. Mail Parser has 500,000 downloads a month. What if we were able to basically inject this dependency tree, one of those packages that is part of the tree, into Mail Parser? So when Mail Parser gets downloaded, all of those gets downloaded. So the next day, what happens is, hey, you are downloading or searching for get cookies packages, something that does cookie manipulation on Express, and you find this thing called Express cookies. And now it actually has 200,000 downloads in the last week or last month. Well, now maybe I'll use it. Now maybe I'll consider using it because I know there's a ton of users using it, or are there? So this is a real story. This is all happened. The maintainer of Mail Parser, account was compromised. And indeed, this incident, really did happen. So here's what we could learn from it. Now, we talked a lot about open source supply chain security, the risks from it, the concerns for maintainers, for us as users, all this impact. And, there are more and more stories, and this is going to impact us more and more years to come, because we're all using open source. And these are great stories. These are, really interesting stories of what is happening and what we could learn from them. But these are, the one-off stories, those malicious, packages, those malwares, and so on. Actually, regular vulnerabilities, those with a CVE, right? They happen all the times. Things like, the OWASP top 10 of, SQL injections and command injections and XSS and, server-side request forgery, all of those things, they're actually more common. We do find more, security bugs, if so to say, in open source packages all the time. This is growing as well. So, things like SQLize, if you're not, on the latest version, you are probably vulnerable to some SQL injections if you're using this ORM. If you're using something like Markdown to JS6, the fact that you are using as a developer React as a front-end framework, for example, is great. If you're using, all of the best practices, that's amazing. If you know not to use dangerously set inner HTML as, dangerous API, or if to use it, how to use it properly, this is amazing, incredible. but it doesn't mean that other maintainers, other libraries that you're using do not have those front-end related security vulnerabilities related to XSS, for example, that could happen because of regressions, because of someone missing something, because of some rule not being obeyed or something like that. So the fact that you're using a modern framework doesn't really relate to anything else as well. So you need to be on top of those packages, even if you think you're following all of those correct best practices for security. So we talked a lot about Markdown and other packages vulnerabilities, but really what I want to do in this kind of second half of this talk is really hack a live application. I want to show you how we get from vulnerabilities that we find in dependencies and talk about them for this 15 minutes or so, and take that into application vulnerabilities, into vulnerabilities that actually stem from those vulnerable dependencies, but actually impact the application itself. So let's see how that works like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up my server here. So Mongo, yeah, I need Mongo running. So we're going to have a Node, backend here and a JavaScript frontend. So it's going to be easy enough for us. So it's npm run start, and we should have a server running, waiting for an endpoint over here. There we go. So we have this, goof to do application. And I'll zoom in a bit more. And what is it actually doing? Well, I can do, several things, right? Like, hi, Datadog, and things like that, hope you're enjoying the conference and whatever I want to add in my to-do here. So this is, nice and fun, but could I actually exploit this? What could I do from this point on? Well, what if I wanted to, well, this is user input, right? So what if I wanted to actually inject something? I could try something like script, the classic XSS, where we're trying to execute a script and persist it on this database, this application, server, service, whatever this product is, trying to persist it. So whatever someone else just, loads this page, maybe they would be affected and that script would be evaluated on the DOM as a valid JavaScript by the browser and executed. So we tried it, but it's not really working. Why is it not working, you're asking? Well, let's see. I've actually added another kind of small contribution to this to-do list, which is, well, what if we want to support Markdown like I was trying to do before, like things like hi like this, right? And we actually want to make things like bold and emphasize. So we could do this, and we could add links or underscore. We could use Markdown for it. Now I'm not going to go and create a Markdown parser myself all from nothing. So I will go to something else like npm.js or the Sneak Advisor, and I will look for Markdown related packages. So here I am going into this is the Sneak Advisor. I could go and find Marked, which I know is a Markdown parser. I see it was published 18 days ago. It really has a good high health score. It looks like it's maintained, active, known security issues in the latest version. It gets downloaded 4 million times a week. That is a lot. So I'll go ahead and use it. This is great. I could go and see which which versions of this package are actually vulnerable, whether that's a high, medium, and whether that's direct, indirect, or maybe there are license issues. So interestingly enough, there was a direct high vulnerability for Markdown, just this past few weeks. So let's move on with this. I did choose Markdown, Mark to do this Markdown, and this script tag didn't work. So why did it not work? Me looked into Marked, and oh, that's right. I now remember that when I used this, someone told me that I needed to do set options sanitize true, because this basically ensures that Marked will be running in kind of like this secure mode, where it will now sanitize any strings that I give it. So this is great for us. This is what I was hoping for, and that's why it didn't work. One thing to note here, though, Marked was in this version that I'm using that I know has some security vulnerabilities that I want to show you here. It defaulted basically to a false here. So if I just use Marked, I did not know that I needed to enable this configuration option. I did, no one told me. I did not read the README, or if it was even on the README, I would basically be using Marked by default as a vulnerable, exploitable way. and that script alert here would have worked. So, thank God I've got this protection in. So that's good. What I could do with Markdown is things like this, right? I could add an address for a website and create this sort of links. This is great. This is why Markdown is really helpful and nice. What if I wanted to use the same route of basically creating an injection attack vector here into the application? Maybe I wanted to do something like JavaScript alert over here, because that's something that I could put in like an href if I'd be doing plain old anchor tags in an HTML element. So I could try doing this. Let's see if this works. Not much. It's breaking down, and the fact that it is not really working too well is due to the fact that that sanitization piece that I've added here is quite smart. It's quite useful. What it does is it actually has a regular expression that looks for something like JavaScript : and when it finds it, try to sanitize all of this junk kind of like away from the string, because it understands this could be malicious. So what could we do at this point? Well, I could go and look at marked source code, because this is open source. Just go to the repository and see how the regex works. Maybe I could find some way that I could bypass the regex. Well, one way is going to be, even without looking at the code, is I could go ahead and try to, I could go ahead and try to basically represent colon in a different way, maybe in the semantic way of HTML entities. So HTML entities are basically, strings or characters that allow us to define certain elements on the screen without using the actual element. What I mean by that is I don't need to do colon. I could actually go and do this HTML entity that represents colon. And when the browser sees this, the browser says, well, I think you meant colon, and it will actually replace it to what it is, and then display a colon without actually parsing or evaluating colon as an actual JavaScript or HTML related context. So I could do something like that, and I know I probably need to close this one for this to work, so maybe I'll try this HTML entity, which I know is the closing tag. So let's try this and see what happens. Well, I know I was also hoping for this to work, but it didn't. At this point, what really happened behind the scenes and in marked source code is, that sanitized piece of true, instantiating it like that, was actually pretty smart. The maintainer here was very conscious of what we would be trying to do, and based on that, they have also have a regex that looks for HTML entities, because they know this is, encoding characters is like a really good way to kind of like escape what you would mean, and the browser might be exploited due to this. So there's a regex that actually, detects this and pushes all of our bad, malware here away. So what I could try instead is, how about if I try adding something into here, like the word this, like literally this word. What happens at this point is the regex looking at this, doesn't recognize, that part of the string as a valid HTML entity, and rightfully so, because this is not valid anything. So the regex fails and marked, bypasses, and this is just fine. But a browser receiving this is understanding that we wanted to add an HTML entity, but we're missing a semicolon, but the browser, it will help us out and, will close this for us. And then the rest of this becomes just fine as a valid, JavaScript and element into the screen. So basically, if I try this attack vector, which, maybe as a small task would have been, kind of like an unintended behavior, let's see what happens now. Well, look at that. I have a cross-site scripting vulnerability here. So I am using an open source package called Marked, which I did use as sanitized true, which has some protection from script tags and all of those other things that could be malicious. But it has a very well-known cross-site scripting vulnerability, which is this. This is a different one that it's not really escaping and doing correctly. So this is the payload. But it's an interesting story of open source to understand like what really happened here and how did we get to this point. So if I scan my application this is the goof up, by the way. If you want to go to like the GitHub/sneak/goof, you will be able to like use this app yourself and train and learn from it. We have a bunch of exploits and readmes that you could work through, and you could scan it. You could just add a project, GitHub or wherever you're taking it from, and see the package manifest or Docker file, or we'll do static analysis when that is generally available for everyone. And when that goes out, I could go in to my package JSON and see what it actually found and what happened there. So let's try and search for marked. There's a ton of dependencies here, and I could look at the dependency tree and find what is going on. So I see marked with several issues, high and medium and so on. But let's look at the vulnerability cards themselves and see what's going on there. So this is what I just showed you. This is the exact POC, which you could see we have provided you as a user to see what is really wrong with this vulnerability. So there's a score, there's a CVSS one here. This one is a little like priority score for you to basically fix it. Why should you fix it? Hey, there's a fix available in all of those things. There's an exploit and so on and so on. We're saying which vulnerable function is it that actually impacts this vulnerability. This is also really helpful if you're using something like Lodash, which is really big generic utility package, and maybe it has a prototype pollution, but maybe you're not using the affected and vulnerable version. So you could actually have more information to triage what is going on. Of course, if there's a fix, you always want to be on the latest version, which has no known vulnerabilities for. So always upgrade makes sense if that's a really quick way for you to mitigate a problem. But anyway, we have more information here, like looking at, well, what is going on with this, right? Like, what is this POC? So I want to show you what was going on. What is the story behind this vulnerability? And this is really the story of open source. So this is the vulnerability page on Snake with the 6SS. We see which versions are affected. It was discovered by Matt Austin, a security researcher who helped uncover this. And there's a bunch of information of how this works. And you see we have like patches if you couldn't upgrade, which we'll see why this is so important. Well, what if I can't upgrade Mark to 036? Let's take a look at the GitHub PR now in retrospective. This happened a few years back, and we can see what was going on there. So Matt opened this issue and pull request back in 2015, right? Opened this back in 2015, May 20. All of the information is here available for everyone. People are thumbs up. This is great. The pull request is great, right? This is a fix, not just complaining of an issue of an XSS with this library, but also fixing it. Also adding some regression tests, that shows us how to replicate it and, make sure that it doesn't replicate again or reproduce as a regression in the future. So this is great, except the time that this was actually landed and going into an actual release that you could upgrade to was about a year later. Now, this is a year where all of those millions of users who downloaded Marked were basically vulnerable to this due to like a publicly known vulnerability. This was out in the open. So it is something to think about, right? The fact that, we might be vulnerable to this kind of, dilemmas where we're using open source and we are dependent on others to fix the issue. So luckily, Fix has this patches which you could apply, very quickly without, with a sneak tooling and without an actual release. But still, this is the story of open source. So back to where we were, right? AppSec is challenging, right? App security is challenging because, software delivery is just, spitting up. We need to be on the edge all the time. Attacker just needs one way to get in. We need to close up all of those, possible ways for them to get in. Also because there's no like formal education for application security in a sense, right? This is a slide from, one of the, recent DEF CON conferences where someone was, putting this out and said, these are the top 10 US computer science programs. Which one do you think has a mandatory class to enroll to that, involves InfoSec or AppSec that you have to take to finish your, to get your degree? Well, you could think, which one of those is more likely to basically have that as a mandatory requirement? The reality, none of them to that point in time, right? Because we are not really teaching, students how to, graduate and be very security experts and expertise and have those skills. Like we're missing on other things, maybe we're not teaching them accessibility related things and performance, all of those cross-cutting concerns, which are important, but we are missing out. And that's why we may end up with those security bugs in the code. And that's why this is important to know that we are actually practicing secure coding practices and conventions, like some of these cheat sheets that we're writing and advocating for at Snyk, helping you basically follow what you should probably do as a best practice. And so are maintainers, right? The open source packages that we use. So with that said, thank you for joining my talk. Use open source, it's awesome, but please enjoy it responsibly. Thank you very much.
There's quite a few questions for Laurent
Cool.
here. The first one seems to be, do you have any insights on how complex it is? I think this is, if I was to rephrase this question for Alejandro, it would be like, how hard is it based on how far the dependency is down in the graph with like relative difficulty to exploit? Because we talked a lot about dependency graphs. That's one of Snyk's strengths, right? This idea of building kind of this graph of direct and indirect dependencies. Is there even really a difficulty ranking in getting to like a specific piece of code?
Yeah, I think this is a good point in terms of understanding, first of all, like the idea of vulnerable paths. So basically, the more that the vulnerability is trickled down the dependency tree, it is potentially harder to mitigate, because then it's like hidden beneath layers of maintainers and releases, and who knows who'll fix it, and then it needs to stream back to you, and so on and so on. So this is like the problem space. We don't score projects or vulnerabilities based on that yet, but it's I think thinking about it from like understanding how many vulnerable paths you have for like an entire application is actually an interesting point to say if that app is more susceptible, more or less susceptible to this kind of like the dependencies that it has, right? The dependency it actually risks out in terms of the maintainers that basically can impact that. So we don't have that. I would say at the beginning of that question was actually like with regards to the fact that we find a lot of vulnerabilities, and it's very much possible that this could add noise. So one of the things that we're doing is we're having a priority score, which is different from a CVSS score. So a priority score will give you sorted by the fact that whether the CVSS is high or not, but also whether it has a fix and whether it has a mature exploit in the wild, whether there's like this is like a new vulnerability, or like 5 years old vulnerability, like no one will search for it maybe, or whatever. So we score it, we prioritize it based on that. And I would say at the end of the day, like if you simply try to upgrade every time you get a fix, which you could also like limit this noise, you could say with Snyk like open only 5 simultaneous pull requests, because I do not want to add more than that kind of noise to the repository, to the term. That's fine, and that's how we'll work with you to fix them. So this is all automated, and hopefully you could mitigate all of this as much as you can.
Yeah, I know that kind of saving time and reducing the amount of like kind of signal to noise is primary mission of Snyk, right?
Important. Yes.
Yeah, and you can see we have some other co-webinars out, Laurent and I do, and you can see us hopefully very soon at a couple other events together, kind of talking on the same thing. There's only one other question that came in here, which is really like more of a question about like static analysis tooling, and if Snyk does score using static analysis of any kind, or if it's just dependency graph based.
Great question. So Snyk is now, I don't know how, people have probably heard about it from like different, times in their lives. Snyk has actually evolved now into a platform. So we have Snyk for open source, which is the whole thing that I was just showing. There's Snyk containers and Snyk IAC for like Kubernetes and YAML. And what we have announced recently, and it's like beta release and like almost going full blown release for everyone. That would be Snyk Code, which is what that question was about. So we are having this product, which is analyzing your first party code, the code that you write as a developer, your team, integrated into your IDE directly as you type and when you monitor the repo, and will suggest fixes and know where the problem started. And these are the commits that we found fixing it, and so many cool things around it. So it would potentially help you as a maintainer also find issues like the regex issues that we saw with Marked, so you could avoid them, or just for your applications team unrelated to open source. So a lot of those things are coming in, and stay tuned.
Yeah, and you can get started for free, right?
Yeah,
so Snick has this great free tier.
Premium model.
It works with Datadog. There's all kinds of fun stuff that you can do there. So
Yep.
we got a lot of positive feedback in the chat as well. Great talk, Laron, as always. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you at the panel.
Yep. See you soon. Bye, everyone.
So next up, we're running a tiny bit behind, but we're going to move to fraud detection using Datadog and Sherlock with PedidosYa. Santiago will certainly let me know if I said that right. And we will move straight into the talk, and we'll take questions for Santiago at the end. It's a great talk. Fraud detection is a hot topic. I know it's one of those defensive things that if you're in the business like Santiago is, you have to be on top of fraud detection. So we'll go ahead and just switch to that now.
Hello, how are you doing? It's a pleasure for me to be speaking here in front of you. And before we begin, I would really like to thank both Andrew and Jacqueline for inviting me and giving me a chance to be a part of this year's Bits of Security. Today we're going to be speaking about Datadog and Sherlock and how we use it to prevent and react and improve fraud detection in PedidosYa. The agenda we have for today is Who Am I? Because I guess if you're watching, you're wondering who's this guy with this strange accent and maybe where is he from. The problem we had at PedidosYa, which drove us to the creation of Sherlock, which is the solution for this problem. Then some use cases for Sherlock, and following a demonstration, because my idea is that after all of this presentation, you can replicate this for yourself or your company. And we are going to be finishing with a Q&A, so you ask all of your questions and I will answer. But do not hesitate to reach out afterwards through LinkedIn, Instagram, email, whatever you like to, if you have any more doubts or you want to share experiences. Who am I? My name is Santiago Rosenblatt, and I'm a 24 years old Uruguayan who for some reason started hacking at a very young age when I was 6 or 7, give or take. Yeah, I know it's young, but I can say I do have friends. I do have friends, but for some reason I started when I was really young, started hacking video games such as Club Penguin or How Hotel, and basically I would hack. My game was to hack, so I was a really big fan of Lakers, and I didn't have enough money, but I knew how to hack, so I would hack the official streaming services for NBA, so NBA League Pass, and I would hack them to have the season subscription for free. They would patch my vulnerability, I would hack them, and that game kept going for years, I guess, until I understood the implications of my acts and the ethical side of it. Besides that, I'm getting this year my computer engineering degree after 5 years of intensive work and study, so I'm really proud and happy about that. And well, in terms of professionally speaking, I'm leading application security at PedidosYa, which is the food delivery leader in South America with more than 25 million users. And people say, and well, I guess that's true as well, that I'm a passionate entrepreneur. I love building and creating stuff. This year we are releasing on August Strike, which, let's say, we're releasing the Uber of cybersecurity in August already with the biggest companies in South America. So we're really proud of that achievement. Other than that, leaving aside the academic and professional aspect, I really like doing sports since I was little, playing music, reading, going out with my friends, and spending time with my family and traveling as well. That's about me, but let's get to what you care about, which is the problem we had. So at PedidosYa, as I told you, we are a really big company, and we have really a lot of valuable information, such as addresses, phone numbers, and we can predict at which address a person is going to be on Wednesday, for example. So there's a lot of attackers and bad people that wants to get access to this information. So we are targeted by a lot of people, and we suffer attacks. Well, yeah, attacks attempts, I would say, because our application it's up, but we suffer denial of service attempts, injection, and some other logic aspects. The thing is that we receive a lot of attacks, but we don't want to react only blocking IP address or just blocking IPs. The idea is that using that information, we want to be able to notify users, hey, let's say there was an account takeover attempt on your account, be aware of who you share your information to, or other thing could be, as a food delivery company, we give free vouchers to people so they can order food. If you register, you receive a $5 voucher, so you can order with a discount, or if you recommend people, you get as well vouchers. So as well, we have a lot of people with 250 accounts, fake accounts, that they use to, well, I will show you later, I will explain later, but let's say they have a lot of accounts that they expect to receive vouchers, and they will use the vouchers to order food for free. So the idea is that instead of blocking the IP, we want to block the users so they can't have access to the account. But with the measures we had in place in terms of web application firewalls, because we have a lot of security in the applications itself, but as a firewall, which in our case we use Cloudflare, which we are really happy with it. But the thing is that it does not allow us to block a user or to notify user with like due to an attack software to his account, we cannot notify it. So we wanted something more flexible, something that could take information out of the alert that was triggered, and then there are several things with the information depending on which alert was. So here you can see an account takeover attempt, and on this, let's say, yeah, let's do this. So here, what you have is that in less than 20 seconds, the same IP address wanted to have access to this account. This is an endpoint that just lets you get access to an account. And the idea is that instead of only blocking the IP, we would like to notify the we switch. Yeah, account takeover attempt. Yeah, so I was telling the idea that here for the account takeover attempt, we have a phone number and an endpoint that actually validates a phone number. So we want to be able to tell this user, hey, be aware of a person in this country trying to access your account, just to give you an idea. And we were not able to do it with Cloudflare because we would be able to just block the IP address. But the problem as well is that in South America, I don't know if it happens in your countries, at least some years ago in Chile, just to give you an idea, one IP address could have been assigned to thousands of users, 10,000 of users. So it wasn't a good return on investment to block 10,000 of users because one was acting in a bad manner, was attacking you. I mean, if you would go to the CTO and tell, hey, we have the best solution in place here, we are blocking the bad guys, each time we receive an attack, we are blocking the IP. Cool. And how does it work? Well, when we receive an attack, we are blocking 10,000 of users. Probably that wouldn't make the CTO happy and the CEO as well. So we thought about other ideas. And another example would be the fraud badger, because as I told you before, we detected that we had people with 250 users, 300, and well, on average, the fraudulent users, they had between 15 and 30 accounts. So what we want to do is actually, instead of blocking this IP address, which would change every 12 hours, we wanted to block in the moment these users. Just go by the user ID and block them instead of blocking the IP address. So why was this happening? So this endpoint lets you know how many vouchers you have in an account. And what we detected is that there's a lot of people that were having fake accounts, and what they would do, they would have 30 accounts. So each day they would run a script chronologically that will tell them which accounts of all of those would have the voucher, right? So what they would do is to use one account to order the fries, one to order the drinks, and one to order the burger, and they would send all of the food to the same address. So of course, when you take this number and go to the back office, you will see that for sure it's fraud, because there were users that had ordered already 10 times, always using vouchers, and then you would see that the address was the same that in another 100 accounts, so it didn't make sense. But we wanted to block the users, not the IP address. But we were not able to do it with Datadog. So for the solution, what we created is something that works together with Datadog. Let's zoom up that and say that in Datadog we configure the rules, and then Datadog with the security monitoring understands when a rule is triggered, and when the rule is triggered, it notified and sends information to Sherlock, and Sherlock acts upon that according to what we configure. So our solution comprises Sherlock's webhook service, Datadog's webhook integration, Datadog security rules, AWS DynamoDB, Cloudflare API, Slack channel plus webhook, Datadog security signals, and Datadog logs. A usual flow, a resume of that would be having your webhook, your Sherlock webhook deploy. Sherlock is actually a bunch of more services, such as it works to check secrets in code and other things. But in this case, let's say this is only the webhook. So you have the webhook in place, then you configure the webhooks in Datadog, so it can sends you the information when something happens. Then you configure a detection rule that will use this webhook when it's triggered, and when the alert is triggered, we will create add some information in AWS DynamoDB, and then we will create a simulate, challenge, or blocking rule in Cloudflare and get a notification in Slack. That would be the usual flow for Sherlock. As the webhook service, we base ourselves in this webhook from this guy, which I call it a plug and play webhook tool that we use. So kudos to this guy. And you just specify the URL path for the webhook. In our case, it's Datadog. Here we have, for example, a secret. Remember to use secrets, but remember as well to rotate them. And then you specify the response and the command you are going to be executing with the payload you receive. It could be Bash, Python. I wanted to use Go because I'm a big fan I'm a big lover of Go, so try to use Go in your programs. But it was not that easy, so I ended up going with Bash, which works pretty well anyway. So what we have is for Sherlock, we have three endpoints, which would be blocking IP, which actually is not blocking because it could be depending on what you send. If you see here, the Sherlock mode, it could be simulate, challenge, or blocking. Then we have a ping echo webhook, because if you want to deploy this on Kubernetes, Docker, or anything, you need a health check. And then we have another one, which is this one, to clear all the Cloudflare rules. Because just in case, if it hasn't happened to us, actually, we have been really lucky, but it can happen something, and you would maybe like to deactivate all of the rules that Sherlock put in place. Because remember, this is something automated, and maybe automated things can go wrong. So you want to have an endpoint to deactivate all of the rules. Then what you can see here is Datadog webhooks integration. What you would be doing is add all of these attributes, which actually are provided by Datadog, and each of them would give you something like the event message, the event title, and so it's valuable information that you probably would end up using. And then what we add is the Sherlock mode, which is something we need. In this case, it's simulate, but it could be, remember, child and Sherlock. And then here you have the webhook. So in this case, Sherlock.strike.sh, hooks, Datadog, and the token, which is the one that's going to be receiving the information when alert is triggered. Then you will proceed to creating a rule. In this case, you have the vouchers rule. So each time an IP executes requests that match this regular expression, so Datadog is going to be, of course, storing this information. And if an IP executes more than 10 attempts in 5 minutes to URLs matching this regular expression, it will notify using the webhook Sherlock inspector in simulate. So in this case, we will issue a simulate rule. And what it will do is store as well the IP address, the attack count for that IP address, the country, the first digit of attack, the reason, and the Sherlock mode. And apart from this information that you're seeing, we store last attack date and many other things that I didn't include here because, well, the table was big enough to be able to fit it here. But why we use Dynamo, or more importantly, why we store the information, is because this helps you understand the way the behavior of attackers, and try to understand why they do what they're doing, what are the attacks that they are actually repeating more, or trying to basically what are the types or kind of attacks that you are getting in the latest times. So you can configure your systems to prevent and react in a better way to them. And then what you see here, it's for Cloudflare API. This is the way a rule that was put in place using Sherlock, how it looks. So basically, it's too many requests on wallet cache out in this case, more than 30 attempts, and the date and time. And this tag, or this annotation, choose the way you want to call it, which says Sherlock, it's really important because it lets you easily identify which rules were created in an automated way using Sherlock. Because remember, if something goes wrong, you want to, really fast, be able to identify the problem, so you don't have downtime because of this, and you can deactivate it easily. Then, here you have an example of how a notification in our Slack channel looks. You have the Cloudflare added with the text similar to Cloudflare, the attacker's IP, the attacker's country, and the mode, which actually matches the color. Here is yellow, but it could be red if it's a block mode. And then after receiving this alert, which you could use again Sherlock, but as well you could complement it, make it even better if you as well combine it. That's the right word. Combine it with for example, Opsgenie to get schedules for several people and get different types of notifications. Then you would come to Datadog security signals, have a look at the signal, and if you want to get more information, click here. Then you would be able to see a sample, and if you want to get more information, even more, you can click on your Log Explorer, and you will have a look at this view, which is similar to the one I showed you in the first place for vouchers which was the endpoint that you used to check for how many vouchers you have in an account. So after that, in our case, as the alert, the information is sent to Sherlock. Sherlock would be able to send it to the fraud team, so they block in automatically the fraudulent users. Or you can have a look here and go to the back office to see what these users are doing. This is what Sherlock is, and some use cases we have could be fraud detection, account takeover attempts, but could be any scenario in which you want to block by a user's attribute instead of an IP address. And more importantly, which is not here, is any scenario in which you want to use the information from the alert to notify users, to do something, to have statistics, just any information that you think is valuable extracting from URL, headers, or body. Let's do a demonstration, quick demo, so you can have a look at what this looks like in real time. Okay, so you should be seeing this, yeah, so that should be working right. So what we have here is the logs dashboard for Datadog, and what I will be doing is just to show you. Let's issue or create one request. So we create one request, Santi strike PedidosYa, and this should be appearing here. If it works, that will be really good. Nothing, still nothing. Am I doing the things properly? I hope so. Let's see what's going on. Maybe if I go again. Let's see. I will give it another try. Maybe refreshing the page. So, okay, yeah, if I refresh, they're here. So these are the requests, and I'm not being blocked. Now, what we're going to do is start configuring our rule. So for that, we're going to create this query, which will tell us only to look in this host, and for regular expressions, matching this URL path. So bits of security, the dash user, dash question mark user ID and the user ID. So similar to the example I was showing you about the vouchers. So once we have this, we are going to go to the top list view, and we're going to aggregate by client IP and by URL path. After we have this, which is matching, as you can see, this tells us the amount of URLs of matching this regular expression that one IP, in this case this IP, has accessed or has issued, like the amount of requests it has executed, maybe. Then after we have this, we are going to export this as a detection rule, and once we have exported this as a detection rule, we are going to set the rollup. In this case, I want to be really fast, so you can have a look, to 1 minute. Then I'm going to change the query name so it's clear, and I'm going to say if we receive in less than 1 minute more than 2 requests, we are going to trigger this rule. Say this is a hide, and we're going to block me. So I shouldn't be able, after it's triggered, to access PedidosYa. And let's say demo bits of security. Then we're going to be configuring a name, and name, and a message. Messages are really important. So whenever an alert is triggered, you know right in the moment what is expected to you, like for you to do. And let's say it's an attack. So that should be. I get that's all, I believe. So let's save the rule. And okay, now the rule is configured. Let's go to signals. And what I'm going to do is, again, repeat the same process. I'm going to do strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. I will just do a bit more, just in case. And strike 6, 7, 8, I should logged in sometime. Let's see. Okay, that's one. Cool. And if I go to samples, it's from, yeah, this one is from now. So I should be receiving in Slack, I mean, I'm guessing this has to be your Sherlock. So I should be seeing in Slack, okay, this is not the one because this is an old one for an hour ago as well, testing this demonstration. But we should be receiving a notification here in Slack in any moment, hopefully fast. Anyway, let's keep trying. Well, I mean, I have the rule should have already created. If I'm lucky. Yes, so it has been created. Let's see if it has appeared in Slack. And it has not yet, for some reason. But it should. I'm wondering what's happening. Murphy's law. Anyway, yeah, so you can see that the rule was created. So it says Sherlock, demo, bits of security, demo bits of security attack at this time, which is my time. And I'm wondering why it hasn't appeared yet, because it should. But yeah, I guess that would be the idea. Let's see, maybe I should touch something. Oh, it does. It did actually. The thing is that for some reason, I needed to open the Slack. But here it is from some moments ago, because here you can see it's well, here it's 17:44, so it actually arrived when it needed to. So well, that would conclude actually the demonstration. And yeah, I will remove the I will remove the rule because I would like to be able to order food after this. So let's get rid of this block, and it's working again. So I should be able to access PedidosYa. And yeah, it's working. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation just to finish. But yeah, so this will conclude the demonstration. As I mentioned before, I would love to chat with you if you have any doubts after the Q&A. And you can do it through my Instagram, Santi-Ross, my email, santiago@strike.sh, or santiago.rosenrod@pedidosya.com. And if not, connect with me through LinkedIn, which I'm always welcome to reply and to share experiences with people, to learn and as well teach. So, well, feel free to reach out and let's see each other on the Q&A. Thank you very much for coming.
But we don't have any questions that came in for that talk. Feel free to post a question if you have a quick question for Santiago. But I just think it's really cool what you're doing here, which is effectively you're using a whole bunch of technology together, Slack, Datadog, etc., to chain together this fraud detection pipeline.
Yeah, definitely. It's a combination of tools, and well, the idea is just to give you an example, so you can, as I mentioned before, so you are able to replicate this, and well, I guess on presentations as they are going to be on demand, you are going to be able to actually see what there was in the screenshots, because I was it was little, and due to definition you were not able to see clearly, but it will be there available with the slides as well. And feel free as well to of course reach out, as I said, in case you have any doubts or need any help. I'm always welcome to help.
Yeah, we're having a little problem with the Zoom upscaling. Some of the stuff is coming through a little blurry, but we'll get it corrected in post for the post-event recordings. So thanks to folks for sticking with us through it, and thanks for being here, Santiago, to answer questions. And we're going to go on because we don't have any open questions for this one, but we'll see you at the panel discussion. I just have one question for you, I think, that we need to answer before we go on, which is, That was really complicated, like all of the things that you put together. How long did it really take you to build that fraud detection pipeline? And did you start non-technical, like with an architecture and a threat model first, or did you just go straight into kind of designing and coding to see what you could do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at first I started with an MVP, so just a simple application that I configured with the webhook, the plug and play webhook. I literally configured it in, I think it was 1 hour, like the MVP, and it was already working. But then I needed to try to I started understanding the rules and how to properly configure the rules in Datadog to be able to do what I wanted, which was to be able to send the alerts when, like in the case with the vouchers, for example, when most of the users, not a specific URL, but a lot of users were being triggered by an IP. And then what took a bit of more time, so the entire step, actually leaving aside AWS DynamoDB, which I added at the end, I think it took me 2 days and a half, more or less. And yeah, after that, it was just a matter of configuring the different kind of alerts you would be able to receive, like generic ones. So we have different times. So one to be able to send information to users, another one's to directly block users by ID or IP. And well, other than that, like the idea was just to leave it generic. So we will be able to, like now, if I want to add a rule, it's literally 10 seconds and it's there and it's working. So that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, love to hear those stories. Also, love to hear the what we don't think of as like edge cases, which is like the IP recycling issue that you pointed out, which is that in South America they're just recycling public IPs frequently, at least the ISP that you were on, and that can be a real issue. So you have to kind of think outside the box.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
So well, that was it. Thank you very much for the question, by the way.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think with that, we're going to move on to Expel.io. We've got Dan and Peter here with us as presenters, and we'll see you back at the panel, Santiago.
Cool.
Hi, and welcome to our talk on database observability for security purposes. I'm Peter Silverman. I'm the CTO here at Expel.
And I'm Dan Whalen. I'm on our detection and response engineering team.
Today, we're going to talk to you about a few things when it comes to database security observability. First, we're going to kind of level set on database monitoring and some trends that are really interesting and kind of have accelerated the use of database as a service and just databases in general. And we're going to talk about the observability data available, how we might leverage it, and then we're going to go into some specifics using MongoDB Atlas as kind of the exemplar. And Dan's then finally going to walk us through some attack scenarios. So why database monitoring as a thing? I think this is a fascinating topic because when you think about database management, it's come so far in really the past 5 years. If you think about 5 years ago, were you considering as an option letting someone else manage your databases, whether it's Snowflake, MongoDB, Atlas, or any of the other providers currently running and scaling your databases automatically? Or were you thinking, I have to run it myself, maybe I'm lucky enough to run it on cloud infrastructure? And that's one of the interesting things is we've noticed that the database management and performance monitoring has come so far from the Nagios days, if you will. But we don't necessarily feel like database security, at least within the customers we talk to and how we look at it, has kept pace with engineering tech stacks and choices engineers are making. And so today we want to kind of talk about the opportunities we see for database observability for security purposes. But before we do that, let's move to like why this is an important topic. Most of the time, databases are the final boss. If you've looked at headline grabbing breaches in the past couple of years, the last step in that attack lifecycle or the chain is grabbing the data, exfiltration. And usually it's done by accessing a database for illicit purposes. And we don't see as many people talking about the opportunity to do database monitoring using a lot of the observability data that's available today that's kind of at your fingertips. And that's kind of one of the things we hope to leverage in this talk is we're not going to drift to bespoke data signal for database security. We're going to talk about some of the common things that we all should have access to because we're monitoring our database's performance and how we might leverage that. So we're always asking ourselves when we journey into a new space at Expel, what signals available? And I hinted at it just a slide ago that we think that a lot of opportunity exists in the kind of engineering and performance monitoring observability that databases produce and that most engineering teams have access to. And we think about our ability to leverage slow queries, spikes in disk consumption, things like that for other purposes like security and security monitoring. And that's kind of what we're going to explore coming up here going forward.
Yeah, just building off of what Pete said, when we think about kind of building a security strategy or detection and response strategy for a type of technology, it really starts with what sort of signal exists. And when we took a look at databases in general, we came away with these three high-level categories. You've got your metrics covering things from resource consumption to application usage, to how timing looks across your app. And this sort of data typically already exists in your environment, right? As an engineer, as you're building an app, you're incorporating these metrics into dashboards and making sure that you're meeting those uptime and SLA goals, if you will. The second big category we see is logs. So in terms of database technologies, you've got generally an authentication log, you've got an error log, often a slow query log, and in many cases, a more detailed audit log that you can configure for specific tables and things like that. Although we find that can be pretty expensive and often a little bit tricky to configure, often requires a little bit of a white glove approach, if you will. There are some other categories of logging as well. So, as an example, maybe custom logging from your application. If you have a security technology in your topology like a WAF, that can be a source of signal as well. But we really solve these big categories across all database services in general.
So I think everyone here has probably heard of the shared responsibility model when it comes to cloud infrastructure. It's a diagram that AWS made famous, but it at this point is well understood. We kind of in thinking about the database management or database provider layer, thought about it similarly in breaking out kind of what the customer is responsible for and what a database service provider is responsible for. So you can see the customer is responsible for the data, especially when it comes to queries. They're responsible for access management, network access, like is this open to any, things like that. Sometimes they're responsible for the configuration, but I think sometimes that can also be abstracted away further, or recommendations can be made by the database provider as a service vendor. And then configuring backups is sometimes the responsibility of the customer, but you can also see it sometimes as a service provider. It depends on the provider. Encryption, these are usually checkboxes you have to turn on, but sometimes it can come default. Alarms and auditing. The database provider is really taking responsibility for the hardware, access to the database from a data center perspective, and additional software upgrades. A lot of times the provider will take that on, making sure that there's good APIs, making sure there's good logging, things like that. The database provider is responsible for all of that.
Yeah, one of the things I would call out here to build on what Pete said is, the service provider in this case is doing a lot of heavy lifting for you, swapping hard drives, handling the network stuff underneath the curtain and all that stuff. But some of what they're providing also represents like a net new attack surface, like things like their control plane, their APIs. These are things you didn't have to worry about at all in terms of observability or security controls. And now you do sort of have to think about managing that kind of access and that sort of risk with their SaaS platform.
It's a good call. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, so we wanted to pick a technology and take a closer look at what security observability would look like. As an example, now we think our findings will generally apply to most databases as a service, but we chose MongoDB Atlas because, first of all, it's sort of an up-and-coming popular technology. Just selfishly, it was very easy for us to get up and running and swipe the credit card and get a test environment up and running where we could sort of play out some of our theories and ideas and get a better understanding really quickly of what a detection strategy or approach would be for the technology. So this should look pretty familiar. We sort of applied this lens more specifically to MongoDB Atlas to get a sense for what sort of signal exists in terms of observability. Again, they've got all the metrics right out of the box. You turn on a cluster, you get all this stuff for free, right? CPU usage, disk usage, all that great stuff. You can easily hook that up to Datadog as an example, as you'll see that we did. They also have support out of the box for all these types of logging. with a couple of checkboxes in their, in their console. You can configure auto logging as well. The platform actually comes with some additional sources of signal that you might not get if you were doing things on-prem. A good example there would be their project alerts. And additionally, their control plane, which is kind of the basis of their entire SaaS platform, it itself produces a source of signal that we can use for detection and response purposes. So we'll dive into what that looks like. Again, just quickly, here's a look at some of the metrics you can pretty quickly and easily configure right out of the box with Atlas. We got this Datadog dashboard up and running with a few clicks of a button, super easy to configure. And in the following sort of attack scenarios, we'll try to dig into how could we use this sort of data for security observability purposes. I mentioned the control plane. So out of the box, they have the capability of generating alerts and notifications for various things happening in their platform. For example, like users joining the project, clusters being spun up, all sorts of things that are happening in their platform. You can configure all kinds of events to notify you when certain events happen. Project alerts, similarly, you can do things like make sure all of your users have multi-factor authentication turned on and alert you if that's not the case. They actually have some built-in monitors looking for certain metrics exceeding certain thresholds. This is all stuff that's useful if you don't have your own APM solution. Just by getting their SaaS platform and signing up to Atlas, you get a lot of this stuff for free. And finally, we touched quickly on logging. Again, this is super easy in their platform. You see it's just a checkbox to turn on database auditing. You can get pretty granular with the specific audit policy. You can enable auditing on certain databases and collections, certain event types, and for certain users. So it allows you to granularly select what kinds of events you want to be logged, which is actually really important for this level of auditing because these logs are pretty voluminous, especially for a large production database. You got to be really careful what types of events you start to log. I think our test cluster that's just sitting there doing nothing was generating 300,000 logs or so a day. So just you got to be careful when flipping some of these switches. Absolutely.
So one of the things we find valuable when we kind of do this thought exercise of like, what would it look like to monitor using observability data is really putting on the attacker hat and getting after it. It's a lot of fun to do that as well, and it really flexes a set of good muscles as you think about what can be attacked, how would you go about it, and then do you have the visibility to detect it. We monitor a lot of cloud environments on behalf of our customers, so we've seen a number of different ways to exfil data by red teams and attackers, and so we've gotten some experience watching what people are doing or trying to do and detecting it. And so we wanted to apply both from the attacker perspective, but then obviously from the defender perspective. And so we've gone ahead and put together a few scenarios where we're going to actually go through how would an attack of this shape, of this ilk, with this kind of access result in potential data theft. But as you think about the Q&A session and we go through this, feel free to bring your ideas or ask what about this. It'd be a fun discussion to have here at the end. So databases offer a ton of convenience. They're really easy to stand up. They abstract away a bunch of the required configuration and scaling and things like that. They can take care of a lot of that for you. But with that, as Dan said earlier, all those niceties come with additional attack services that can be leveraged by the attacker. And so there is no, for example, cloud console to your database when you're running it on-prem. That doesn't really exist. There's equivalents, but like I can log into a web page that's accessible from anywhere on the internet and access your database doesn't generally for the most part. So it's one of the things to think about as you think about additional attack surfaces or risk is like, well, what happens if someone gets access to the console and what are the ways they could be?
Yeah, and Peter mentioned there's a lot of benefit to sort of putting on the attacker hat and thinking like an attacker would. So for these examples, we're going to play off of that and think about a scenario where somebody has credentials or maybe somebody has an API key for the Atlas platform. What does attacker activity look like once that's happened? And we'll play that out and think about some of the actions they might take and follow on to determine, okay, how can we leverage some of those sources of signal we talk about to detect and hopefully respond quickly to an event like that. So let's put on that attacker hat and see and think about what we would do once we have access to the Atlas console. Now, by and large, attackers are are really looking to get in and get out, get that data as quickly as they can, and that's typically what they're after. So one of the first things I might do as an attacker is try to figure out how I can download a copy of your database. And the Atlas console, on one hand, is very convenient. When you spin up a cluster, you get automatic backups, automatic snapshots. All this stuff is super convenient for reliability. It's also super convenient to me as an attacker. If I need a copy of your database, I can go to that section of Atlas, find your database snapshots, and request a download. So that's probably one of the first actions I would take as an attacker. In Atlas, there's a couple of things that you need to do to accomplish that as an attacker. You request the download link, and for that to be accessible by you, you actually have to whitelist your IP address. You can't just download this from any old IP address. Those are actually two distinct events that we could potentially key off of thinking about how to defend from this type of thing. Additionally, as an attacker, I'm going to want to establish some sort of persistent access to the Atlas service, right? Maybe I get a point-in-time snapshot. Well, let's say I want to come back a month from now and get an updated copy of your database. How would I go about persisting in the Atlas service? There's a couple of ways. One, I may just create myself a new user. I may create myself a new user in the Atlas console, which could grant me project or organizational level access to all the clusters, or I could grant myself access to a specific database by creating a new database user as well. So this type of activity is logged in two places. So when you create a new database user via their console, which is very quick and easy, I might add, that generates a control plane event. But you also get an event at the database level if you have auditing turned on there as well. So again, two opportunities for us to detect that type of attacker activity. So we've talked about two really common things you might do as an attacker, right? Establish persistence, get a copy of the database. When we looked through the Atlas service, we also sort of wanted to look through the lens of a more sophisticated attacker. What might someone who wants to persist for a long period of time, potentially be a little more stealthy, what sorts of more advanced things could you do as an attacker that might fly under the radar, if you will? And one of the capabilities we came across we thought was pretty interesting from an attacker's perspective is Atlas allows you to create database triggers in their console. And those database triggers will respond to events that happen in your cluster. And this is really interesting. As an attacker, I could do something like this, right? I could create a new trigger that responds to an insert on my database, gets the full document, and then in this, kind of simple but silly example here, we'll actually post that full document back out to an attacker-controlled IP address. So this is kind of a cool way of an attacker stealthily, constantly exfiltrating data as it's added to your database in production, which is pretty cool. And unfortunately, in terms of logging, there's not a whole lot of visibility into this. Creating a trigger in their console doesn't generate a control plane event, and you really don't get a clear indication of this happening at the database audit level as well, although there's some tangential events that happen, like creation of the database user and things like that. So let's zoom back out and think about what we did as the attacker here, and think about what sort of signal we could leverage as a defender to clue ourselves into the fact that there's an attacker rummaging around our console. First of all, we stolen credentials, and a lot of times that looks suspicious when the attacker starts to use them, right? So ideally, we would want to identify as a defender when an attacker uses compromised credentials and logs into the platform. Unfortunately, that's not really possible with Atlas today, and this is often the case with many security or database as a service or anything as a service providers these days. Is there's not a whole lot of visibility into authentication into their platform. There's no event stream of logins that we can leverage from the control plane, nothing at the database level or the metrics level. The one caveat is when you log in from a new IP address as a user to their console, the user gets an email from Atlas that says, "Hey, we saw a new login. Is this you?" So there's something there, but again, that's not super helpful from a defender perspective. I want a feed of all my users' authentication activity so I can see when compromised credentials are being used. There are a couple other activities we did though, and the visibility there is a little bit better. So for example, if we poke around a collection, use the Data Explorer in Atlas to view data, insert data, that's all logged. adding an IP address to the allow list is logged, downloading snapshots, creating database users, all that stuff is logged, which is great. And we did hit on the fact that the trigger is a bit more of a stealthy method. Unfortunately, no logs there. So we learned a couple things about what's logged, what isn't. But all this represents kind of a pretty useful exercise. And now we can go kind of apply some of these learnings to those streams of data to try to identify when credentials are compromised in our environment. So we posed this scenario to some people in the community, some of our customers, some organizations using Atlas, and we sort of brainstormed together what sort of things would we do or want to do ideally to address this kind of risk. There's a couple of things that come to mind that I heard, and maybe Peter, you have some things as well. But we heard, of course, MFA, like MFA everywhere. That's a great way to limit access and control access to credentials into the console. You have to also be really careful about those API keys. Those are often highly permissioned, and an API key can mean full access to a cluster very easily, right? I don't know, Peter, if you heard anything else from those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think you highlighted the key takeaways is just that cloud console access is unique, and that once they've compromised an account that gives them access, they're able to access it without having to go through your infrastructure, essentially, in a lot of cases. And so it's just good to have an understanding of what telemetry data is available, what signals available, and how to potentially react, or what to look for to react. Yep.
The only other thing I would say is Atlas and many other as a service platforms do have role-based access control. So making sure you're also doing like least privilege helps here as well. So a compromised account doesn't lead to a full account compromise.
And we've talked to a number of customers there where the role-based access controls are reviewed at some fixed interval, where there's a calendar reminder that goes off because you have people adding themselves or creating new accounts where they're not following the best practices. And so having even a manual process to review those is going to pay dividends, because you're going to likely catch stuff over the course of doing that pretty regularly.
Absolutely.
The next scenario is a more standard one. It is hey, you have an application. It is using an interface or an API. That is, interface or API is backed by some database, and there's something wrong with that interface or API. There's a bug, there's a flaw, and it's vulnerable. And that is the most common attack scenario we see, at least in the news where it's discussed. And it's pretty common. I think even it's just probably the most common one out there. And so what we're going to do here is kind of take a look at what an attack on a vulnerable application accessing a database would look like, and what signals available for us to detect and respond using this scenario.
Yeah, so we wanted to play this one out and sort of be able to put on the attacker hat again. In order to do that, we needed some sort of vulnerable application. So I whipped up a pretty awful application here that I would recommend absolutely no one runs in production or anywhere for that matter, to illustrate what some of these vulnerabilities could look like, and ultimately how we could use, again, some of those sources of signal like metrics and logs to identify attacks. So this is the document viewer 9000. This application allows you to input a query, and it will return documents that match that query and let you view them. There's a couple key things I point out about how this application works that represent some pretty significant vulnerabilities, and they're probably jumping out of the screen here at you if you're an app developer yourself. First of all, we're exposing the database and collection names in the URL, which is not great. So now just by visiting a web page, an attacker knows a lot about how your application works and what the database looks like behind that application. We're also allowing the attacker to directly supply a query string that's just a regex filter on the database. Again, not great, no input sanitization whatsoever. So as an attacker, I can pass any regex query I want, any regex filter I want to this application, and get one to all of the documents in that collection. And finally, because again, this database and collection are in the URL here, it's more than them just being presented in the URL. The database and collection are dynamically selected based on the URL. So as an attacker, I can now read pretty much any data from any collection and database that this web application is hooked up to. So again, a little bit of an extreme example, but one that we can use to illustrate what some of these attacks might look like as an attacker. So let's put on that attacker hat again. Again, I'm a real hacker here, so I'm going to use a real hacker tool, namely Burp Suite. And we're going to poke at this application like an attacker might. So a couple things. First of all, we're probably pretty quickly going to understand that the database name and the collection name are exposed in the URL. And by fiddling with those values, I can now change the database and collection that we're retrieving data from. I'm also going to poke at that query string and pass other things like, for example, .star, and pretty quickly realize that now I can return any number of documents from those databases that I want as an attacker. There is a little bit of a limitation here now because we don't have direct interactive access with the database. We don't know, for example, what collections exist. So now as an attacker, I have to do a little bit of enumeration to really find and discover the data that I'm after. I don't know, for example, what the database name is or what the collection name is that holds all that super sensitive information that I really want to get access to. So again, I can use Burp Suite here as an attacker and load up some word lists and literally just enumerate a list of possible databases, possible collections, and try a bunch of stuff until, like in this example, I find the magic combination of, hey, the database name is secret, the collection name is passwords, and it has X many documents. So again, an example of how an attacker might learn or enumerate the database to figure out where that juicy information really lives. So let's put our Defender hat back on and take a look at our sources of signal and try to get a sense for what we can use to clue us into that our application is being abused. So first of all, we went to our metrics. We went back to our Datadog dashboard and we saw a few pretty interesting things here. First of all, our read latency, the top left graph here, that spiked pretty significantly when, as an attacker, we were doing that enumeration of all those databases. Additionally, this documents returned metric went through the moon, or to the moon, basically. Once we hit that database and collection, we found it, and we returned all the documents. So that's probably pretty uncommon for your application to issue a query to your database that returns literally every document in the database. That's probably something that's a bit unusual. And finally, along the same lines, we saw the metric for the number of queries spike during this time frame as well. I mean, again, as an attacker, we're guessing a whole bunch of stuff really, really quickly. And so that metric is going to spike up as well. So 3 pretty good opportunities for us to use existing metrics that we already have wired up to develop some security monitors to indicate abuse. We also took a look at the audit logs for Atlas. Again, this is the database level auditing to get a sense for what these attacks looked like from a logging perspective. There's 2 kind of key behaviors that we were able to pull out here and identify. One is we saw the application user account issue a whole bunch of find commands across many distinct namespaces, which is a pretty unusual behavior for an application. As you think about how your application interacts with your database, it's usually going to be interacting with a fairly static set of databases, collections, or tables, depending on what architecture you're using. But to see that spike and to see, in particular, a bunch of find queries against, databases that we know don't exist, collections we know that don't exist, that's pretty unusual, and that's something that can clue us into application abuse. And then finally, a bunch of commands where the filter is returning everything in the database. Again, pretty highly unusual. So again, kind of summarizing what we saw here, we did a bunch of enumeration. We returned an entire collection. All this stuff is captured in the database logs, but again, you have to know what to look for there and have to profile what your normal application behavior looks like and look for some of those behaviors that might indicate abuse. And metrics actually start to become real useful here. Returning an entire database, that spikes a bunch of metrics in Datadog. That's something that we can develop and monitor against. And so again, we had posed this scenario to the security community and some of our customers and had a good conversation around this. And we brainstormed together how we might want to monitor our app for abuse. We talked about a couple things here, metrics to look for, logging behaviors and patterns to look for, some other common things that organizations brought up would be like, if you've got a web application firewall in your topology, that's a good source for relevant signal in this case. Hopefully you have that in front of your web application and it should be generating some alerts related to this activity. If you've got application logs as well, that would be something relevant to look into here as well. Anything, Peter, that you're thinking I'm missing there?
No, I think you covered bases there.
Cool.
All right, so this will be the last scenario. It's one that we've seen play out a couple times in customer environments, where the attackers actually move to the build server as a way to pivot into production infrastructure. What we've seen in real world scenarios is a lot of build servers kind of accrue technical debt or just CRUD, and some of that CRUD or technical debt is creds left on a build server because they were wiring up the build server and they were making sure that things were accessing prod correctly and forgot to delete the credential file, things like that. So we've seen, and the other thing that we've seen is that the patching of build servers may be slow, especially if it's self-hosted, because it's believed to be kind of self-contained and not facing the internet. But once someone gets into your environment, they can use it as a potential way to escalate privileges into production. So we're going to kind of walk through that scenario.
Yeah, again, this is a pretty much a nightmare scenario for most engineering teams, because your build server often has read-write, and highly permissioned access to your database. And that interactive access is really powerful as an attacker, right? There's a couple things I can do right off the bat. I can just literally, use the MongoDB shell to connect to your database and poke around. I don't need to bother with enumeration. I can just show the database schema with the native commands of the shell. Or as attacker, again, going back to their primary motive, I can just run MongoDump and pretty quickly get a copy of the whole database and exfiltrate that off of the build server. So we did that, and this is kind of what that looks like from a metrics perspective. So we ran MongoDump against our fake application here, and there's really two interesting events that happened. First of all, we talked about project alerts. So the Atlas, service comes with some of these default metrics-based alerts, and we got an email like, I ran MongoDump and I got an email in my inbox showed up that, hey, we saw a lot of documents got returned from this query. That was pretty cool, actually. Cool to see. And going to our metrics, we saw what triggered that, right? Again, we saw this when we did enumeration as an attacker, but seeing that metric for documents returned spike means somebody accessed a significant amount of documents, and that's pretty unusual. And that's probably going to be the best indicator for this type of attack. There's a couple things we would want to detect here. Again, database authentication from an unusual IP address. Typically, those build credentials should only be used from that build server, right? So again, if you saw those credentials being used from a different IP address, that's something that could clue you into those build credentials being compromised or that build server being compromised. Enumeration, poking around with a shell, this is stuff that's going to be really difficult to detect because you've got interactive access to the database. A lot of those operations are not logged. Things like adding users and roles or dumping the database, again, we do have an opportunity via the audit logs or via metrics to detect those types of activities. And again, we posed this final scenario to some organizations in the community and sort of brainstormed how do we want to protect ourselves against this type of attack. There's a couple common themes. First of all, having good EDR visibility on all of your developer workstations, making sure that if one of those workstations gets compromised, you've got visibility into that, and their credentials can't be used to move laterally to the build server. Having some sort of visibility on the build server itself, managing access to the build server with MFA, multi-factor authentication, and just having good visibility and protections around the credentials that exist in that build pipeline, all really important. And so we wanted to kind of round all this out. We talked about a lot of stuff here, and really the theme of this is there's signal you already have today, like in metrics, in database logging, and with pretty minimal effort in playing out some of these attack scenarios in your environment, you can take advantage of that signal and start getting some security value pretty quickly, namely with metrics, with logs. And it's kind of a process that begins there, but there's going to be opportunities to enhance logging, enhance auditing, improve this over time. But we believe with pretty minimal effort, you can start to take advantage of some of those sources of signals that are already out there today.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending the talk. Yeah.
There were some themes I heard called out for sure, which is auditing with regard to supply chain, the CI/CD server example, which we talk about as like nightmare scenario, but really it's actually pretty common. I feel like that we have Jenkins box plus misconfiguration, right?
Yeah, we've seen it quite a few times as a pivot point into production environment, especially when you think about just building those out and then companies going fast, building them out, forgetting that PG pass is there or whatever, and someone coming back in and finding it.
It looks like we do have one question from the audience. It's about obfuscation. Does it stand to reason that adversaries would employ some methods to remain undetected, such as slowing down attempts to obtain documents? So basically, this is like, how often do you see circumvention of anomaly detection, and what are the mitigations for that?
The classic low and slow, and then the question is, how do you know what you don't know?
Yeah.
It's a real challenge, right? There's a bunch of stuff we do from a quality perspective to ensure that as we find stuff, we're sweeping backwards to look for additional things that could have been low and slow and kind of slip through the cracks. But it's a really hard problem. You can't answer the question. You don't know what you don't know. I haven't seen too many attacks where they target low and slow through the audit logs. I have seen there's some interesting stuff that was put out last year by some folks. I don't want to miscredit, but it was I think a KubeCon talk where they identified that certain infrastructure provider services won't log certain message sizes. So you could obfuscate yourself by putting a really long user agent in and doing stuff, and then it would just fall out of the audit trail. So you wouldn't actually even show up. I've seen that, like we've seen those kinds of research examples. But a lot of attackers are just stoked to be in the game and stoked to have access, and they're going to go as fast as possible because their end goal is in sight. It's kind of like one of those counterintuitive human nature things where like we can talk about low and slow, and then how do we find what we don't know? But also, like if you think about the finish lines you can see the finish line. There's a human nature to run really fast towards it sometimes too, and they can kind of make themselves known that way.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is, most organizations, at least in our experience, aren't even looking at the basics yet. They haven't even begun to start to look at the stuff from a security point of view, and really walk before you run. Like start with stuff that's easy that you could do today, and then start to think about the more advanced, sophisticated attackers. Right? A lot of organizations get hyper focused on like the super elite, the super sophisticated adversary, but they're missing a lot of those basics. So really start there, right?
Yeah, I used to have a coworker who did primarily like EDR type stuff, and he always said the basics are hard because they're not interesting, and no one wants to really focus on the basics. They want to go all the way to ML anomaly detection, and they don't really want to practice good hygiene, and that's like 99% of prevention, right? Is really focusing on this totally uninteresting stuff and being really, really competent at that.
Agreed.
That's a good topic for the panel. Let's bring it to the panel. But since we're behind, I want to go on, and I want to make sure that we give Kelly from Twitter the airtime that she deserves here, and then we'll go on to that panel. So if you're here attending the talk, once again, thanks Dan and Peter for the great presentation. I feel like that could have been a 3-hour workshop, and it easily could be. We'll see you at the panel. But if you're here and you're watching and you're from Team Twitter, let us know in the chat, because Kelly is up next.
Hi there, I'm Kelly, and this is Application Security at Scale. So I'm a software engineer at Twitter. I've been here for about 5 years, and I've been on the application security team for about 1.5 of those. We are a small team in a large company. There's not that many of us compared to thousands of Twitter engineers. And our main focuses are static analysis and API and web security within the overarching realm of product security. Our customers are mostly developers, but we also care about the users too. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing recently, and give you a little bit of background so that it makes sense why we're doing those things. So this is the reason why we are the way we are. We can't do security in a vacuum. We can't just partner with other InfoSec teams if we want to secure the whole application layer. We got to work across the whole stack. So we partner with people all across Twitter, especially API and web teams, to make the paved and easy path secure by default. Okay, so for a little background, some of you have most likely seen some version of this before, but I'd like to explain what it is if you haven't. In Agile and application security, we've got this idea of the software development lifecycle, the SDLC. Ideally, we want touch points with engineering and product teams like at every phase of the SDLC so that we ensure that we're giving folks the help that they need to design, build, and ship secure products. This is by no means a new idea, but it's helpful for my team to figure out how and where within the lifecycle of a product we can provide additional value. We've had a pretty consistently good toehold in the design and planning stages of the software lifecycle through our involvement in technical design reviews as security reviewers. We've also had static analysis as a first-class product for a long time. We have internal folks thinking offensively about our applications, and we run security training on various topics like how to threat model your service. We also saw an opportunity to better support our engineers throughout a couple of phases of the SDLC, however, the deployment and development phases in particular. Dino is at Square. He's not at Twitter, to be clear, but the feeling in this tweet makes it seem like his team is another good example of another team doing great work in this space. As an engineering team, we're constantly looking for opportunities to provide solutions that are available by default in the tools and frameworks that our developers use. In moving to work in a more cross-team way and working more directly with our customers in the last few years, we've been learning more about what other teams go through on a daily basis and more about what they actually want and need. In general, Twitter engineers are pretty willing to listen and fix stuff when we bring them issues, which is amazing. But we're still a company with plenty of old code and documentation and design decisions that we have to overcome or just plain adapt to. In 2018 or so, after we were working on other areas of product security for several years, we discovered an opportunity to provide more assistance to teams in a few areas of the SDLC. We had some tooling from earlier iterations of the team that we hadn't paid that much attention to for a while. It was in production and it was helping, but we could do better. We could do more to improve it. We had some interesting scaling and adaptation challenges at this point as well. What we had in terms of tooling available to developers was built for 2015 or 2016 era Twitter, and we have grown a bunch in terms of users and requests, as well as in terms of just overall company size and number of engineers over the last 5 or so years. We have specific needs as a company due to the streaming nature of some of our products, the number of inbound requests we see when considered as a distributed system, and so forth. We're moving toward more partnership-based engagements in terms of security engineering, pen testing, and also building stuff. We want to strike a balance between high-touch custom tailoring and security solutions that are adapted for large chunks of Twitter engineering. We want to skew toward things that teams outside the InfoSec org do not need a lot of specific security knowledge to take advantage of. So this is a cool tractor. I found it on the internet late at night and it was really cute, so I just kind of rolled with it. We have a little rust on the underside, just like this tractor probably does, and plenty of technical choices we have to live with because that bed's been made. Every other company that's been around for a little bit has the same deal. This is not the newest tractor that you'll find. It is an early Lamborghini Trattori. So let's imagine it's been customized over time by its owner. Maybe they're like a grape grower and this tractor is just the right size to fit between rows of grapes. It's a little different from your modern John Deere or Kubota, even though they do similar jobs. As the AppSec team, we try to make choices that will lead to the strongest outcome for the next 2 to 4 years, given our existing constraints. For instance, we already have lots of the things that we could get from something like a commercial WAF, a web application firewall, running in production. So that's not something that we would necessarily consider adding. We have ways to set rules to shape traffic if we're being attacked or some users threaten the quality of the experience of other users. We have web security protections. We have API security protections. We have great engineers all across Twitter who work on every aspect of our products and services. But just like a physical space machine, maybe this tractor, if you stop working on code, it's not going to look so shiny anymore. Like, it can seize up. The next person to work on this tractor might not have context about why some things are the way they are. It might not be the best fit for current circumstances. We might need to, replace some parts. Through maintenance, addition of custom parts, and adaptation, this cute little tractor might be difficult to replace with a brand new tractor, even if we might like to, since it's developed some quirks over time and, doesn't have all the fancy extras that you would get with a new tractor, like computers. For those of you who are considering tractors, I would highly encourage you to see what can be reused, what should be totally replaced, and what features are best suited for your own use cases and the existing constraints within your systems before you make a change to your current approach. But also, I guess, don't be afraid to buy a new tractor if it's the best option once you've considered the facts. We want our users to be confident in trusting us to keep their data safe, and we want them to have a good experience with our products and our platform. As application security, we want our work to be pretty much invisible to the Twitter end user. All right, so this is the part where I talk about our recent work. So we kind of wanted to keep the scope small at first, though, for instance, open sourcing our code or including it in upstream open source frameworks might be an eventual goal. It seemed much more sensible to worry about later after we had adapted or adopted what we could to meet the current needs we identified within Twitter. We're also domain experts. We know application security, and it's our job to provide that knowledge to help the company. So anything we build should be suitable to help our engineers secure themselves in the general case. Like, if folks do have specific problems and want to write custom config, we should enable them to through providing that functionality and also giving advice on an as-needed basis. But that shouldn't be the thing that everyone has to do by default to be protected. We want to make sure that whatever developers actually get by default should be reasonably safe for our environment as well as tailored to their needs. But we also can't be too high touch. There are only a few of us, and there are way more Twitter developers than there are of us. Manual code reviews all across Twitter would be next to impossible for a team of our size versus everyone. But we also want to make sure that we build toward opt-out versus opt-in so things are easiest. We wanted to go for the low-hanging fruit where possible and build from okay to good versus okay to awesome to start with. We can iterate and we can get from good to awesome down the road. It was also important to us to document as much as possible. We've recently been leveraging Twitter's technical design document framework, where we would normally just have input as security reviewers helping out other teams, to bring in stakeholders from product teams and get their opinions as early as possible in our own design process. This has helped us to better collaborate with engineers all across Twitter and communicate our ideas for improvements through a medium that they're relatively used to. Okay. We also wanted to be able to keep ourselves accountable and be better accountable to leadership. We want to be able to reference metrics like who's opted out and shouldn't be, who needs more protection, who's actually adequately protected. We want to be able to periodically evaluate the effectiveness of our approach so that we can change things up when we need to. So the first example I'm going to give you is a library that we have been working on for CSRF protections. Before this, we had a whole variety of CSRF implementations. So we've been working on this stuff in relatively close collaboration with our customers because we want to more proactively meet their needs in the implementation and deployment phases of the SDLC. CSRF happens when an attacker is able to abuse a user's browser while the user has a live session to a website through some kind of scenario like an HTML phishing email. So in the background, what the attacker will do is they'll have a post request or something which will execute and force the user's browser to just send the cookies for that live session that they already have. So the attacker doesn't need to steal credentials or anything like that. Like, it's much lower touch from their perspective. But, still dangerous for us. And most of the time, the protections we had were opt-in. Initially, we had tried to bake our CSRF protections into common code, which is used across a lot of individual backend Scala apps, which was a good start. But the way that we did this initially with Finatra filters, as I'll demonstrate in the next couple of slides, made it difficult for us to go back and actually audit what running in prod is actually protected, or understand how good we're doing at a systems level. Much of our CSRF code was previously implemented as filters, which could optionally be added into your service when you build with Twitter's most commonly used service framework, Finatra, in Scala. So this is an example of what a filter might look like. This is not actually a CSRF filter, because to show you all of our code would take longer than we have. But I just wanted to give you a small example. So these are kind of like micro libraries. Code that is added to a service in a filter gets executed before the business logic and the controller the filter is applied to. You can compose filters and you can inherit from other filters, just like we have here with this extends simple filters line. So I just wanted to show you a simple filter so that you could get the idea. On the request path, this piece of code actually does nothing, but on the response path, it turns bubbled up exceptions from the rest of the app into HTTP error responses using functionality from the passed in parameter exception manager. Oh, did it again. Okay. So this is where we're using exception mapping filter. So what you would actually see in your code would be common filters. That would be the thing that you would include in your server. This is a good example of something that you might see across a lot of different services. So what we have here is many filters that are joined together in order. So A through E all get applied to the inbound request in order, then to the outbound response in reverse. This is really cool and useful from the standpoint of code reuse, but it also means that just looking at service code, someone like me without context might see common filters added to that service and not know that it also includes exception mapping filter implicitly. So it's possible to chain your filters infinitely deep. It's quite possible to accidentally include duplicates, and there's no great way to get specific metrics on who does or doesn't have what beyond just the basic, okay, you have these packages. So this, at the filter level of individual services, is a great example of a place to bake in security by default if you don't have that many customers yet. So if you wanted to share code between 5 services or something, maybe for purposes of unifying logging, this is a really great way to do that. But it's, if we start sharing code across a lot of services, it's hard to audit and understand when reading due to the infinite chaining thing, and it doesn't scale super well. We really need auditability here, and we need a more central way to apply our code so that we have an easier time getting metrics and logs, and if something goes wrong, we're in charge of the implementation and carrying the pager for it, and it's not on each individual team to figure out what's up with our code. So this is how you would add this filter, this common filters, into a backend Scala service. Just small example again. So these are applied in the defined order, these filters here, to this router object, which takes inbound requests. Our filters are again executed before the business logic in this my controller for the route the request goes to. Our request goes down the filter chain, response comes back up. Just kind of wanted to complete the example. After all this, you might be thinking okay, big deal. They can probably just use build tooling and this is pretty easy to figure out. But the thing is, historically, that's not what we have to deal with. We have an entire package of security things that get added everywhere. So that doesn't tell us individually what's going on. So that's, that bed's kind of been made. Most filters are implemented as part of a larger package. Tracking package usage also doesn't tell you much about what's actually running in the service, since you can have package dependencies you don't actually use. If you wanted as a developer to be sure your own service is configured correctly, that is of course possible, but the real problem was once we got over a certain number of Finatra apps using our code, it just became less and less possible to understand what was going on. Like, there's no easy global way to say these 432 services have a class and these 23 don't. And this also doesn't protect people in a polyglot way. Twitter likes Scala an awful lot, but it's not the only language we run. We also have Node, we also have Go. Like, this does not protect services like that aren't running on the JVM. So repeating this, since it's a bit easier to visualize some of these now that you've seen an example. So we had limitations imposed by the way we were doing things, particularly with regard to scaling up and auditing. A filter is just one line of code in a service, essentially, and it's easy to miss. It is also hard to tell what's buried deep in a service's filter chain across all services built using the Finatra framework at Twitter. So filters are great for code reuse, not so much for security stuff that we would like to audit. If you're trying to protect entire systems or do anything at a systems level versus at the level of thinking about effects on a single service, it's not super efficient to bake repeated code into each and every service as well, especially if, like, in the case of CSRF, you generally want it active except for very specific cases where you want people to be able to opt out. So what we did, we merged a bunch of our CSRF implementations, there were many, into a single library. We dried up a bunch of the stuff that was, similar and just, repeated with one name or something. And we worked this new library into the routing system that sits in front of most Twitter services in an opt-out way where opt-outs can be done for specific API routes. The main reason we were able to get AppSec code into this internal routing system, though, which is where we ended up putting it to centralize it better, was through collaborating with the engineers who own that system. And we really lucked out because they were open to the idea of adding custom security code there, which not everyone might be. If we hadn't asked their opinion on the best way to protect a bunch of services at once in a way that is less language specific, we might have ended up doing something less effective. The key thing here was to get the right folks involved at the right point in our own design phase. Our main goal was to, with condensing all these implementations and trying to get them into a single place, was to scale up drastically in an auditable way all at once. Now, if you're a service owner, you can opt a specific API route out of any CSRF check if you end up needing to due to some business constraints, without having to change any of your business logic or anything in your actual service. You just change your routing configuration, so that's pretty cool. Instead of protecting single client server sets at a time in a really ad hoc way like we were before, we want to protect as much of Twitter at once as we can in an auditable way. This is good for our customer-facing team since they don't need to know the details of our implementation, and it's good for us because it's auditable in configuration versus directly in code. It can also be hot-loaded, which is kind of nice, whereas previously you would have to recompile and redeploy if you had a problem. So the second example I want to give you is our content security policy tooling. So we've been working on making it easier for Twitter engineering teams to create and serve content security policies for their API endpoints. To give a brief definition, an API will serve a content security policy header with every response to the client in order to protect the front end from various types of attacks like cross-site scripting. So the browser knows what it can and can't execute. We provide our customers with a library for CSP configuration and a filter that they can apply that configuration on a service-by-service basis. What we don't want to see is this. This kind of huge policy is, if at all possible, better to avoid. We can't, this is hard to audit. It's hard to read. It's hard to know what in there you don't actually need or even maybe still own. This is a great example of why non-sing combined with strict dynamic is so powerful. This style of policy with these giant allow lists is hard to understand for everyone. And we want to simplify things. Not everyone at Twitter has adopted our updates yet. We're still working on rolling out to early adopters this quarter, and we'll roll out to more teams and services across the coming year. But this is where we're going. So we had support before in production for a limited subset of CSP v2, which is an older version of the CSP standard, and Safari still doesn't support CSP v3, so we're going to have to continue to support v2, but we have nonces at least, so we don't have to go full on like allow list madness like that. But what we didn't have support for every directive in even the v2 standard, and we didn't really encourage the use of nonces over allow lists, even though like it is so much more simple to set strict dynamic nonce everything and just allow like that blessedness to carry through to everything that all of your sources include. We also want to reduce the number of configure views that the AppSec team does for a team, like literally just adding another Twitter internal domain to their staging CSP. We want to make it easier for developers to be confident in their own CSP changes and give them the tooling to test stuff. So this was another place where we looked for a lot of customer input, which helped us understand what we needed to provide, which was better documentation and tooling, right? So the need was people were kind of like, well, I have a CSP update, but what's it going to do? Who knows? So we wanted to help developers test their CSP before sending them to production in order to reduce the high-touch nature of reviews for uses of our CSP configuration library. We were also luckily able to get some insight from partner teams in InfoSec who work on areas like certificate management and benefit from their expertise. They suggested making our configuration dynamically updatable so that folks could hot load like with CSRF routing stuff instead of compiled in. So this was also luckily a big win for helping us to write tooling to help developers write their own content security policies and test their updates. One thing we didn't want to do, though, was over-index on building all this cool custom stuff. We started with documenting good open source tools that devs mostly were not aware of, and then we built on what we couldn't find and still felt we had need for. April King, who recently joined us, brought Mozilla Laboratory with her, and she's been helping us to document use of that for our teams as well, so that's pretty darn cool. You may also notice a difference between the CSRF and the CSP projects, like in terms of scoping the work that we started with and the overall impact of our initial effort. One of the things that we learned with the CSRF project was that going from like an okay solution that worked for some apps to an awesome solution that works for all apps turned out to be more work than it made sense to do up front. Twitter is a polyglot environment, and it is important that as AppSec, we do our best to support the Twitter application layer, not just the part of it that's Scala. But with the CSP project, we found that it was better to go from okay to good instead, upfront, and build a foundation which we could iterate on in the future to get all the way to awesome. We started with just changing up our existing libraries and building tooling around using those libraries so our customers would be more successful at protecting their endpoints, and we will in the future build on that foundation to unify how CSPs are configured across Twitter. So the CSRF project took longer than I would have liked because we had to go back and make some changes to our existing like OK state code and use in individual Scala services to get it to a better state after we like fully set ourselves up to provide awesome cross-site request forgery protections for all of the endpoints, not just those served by Scala apps. I'd like to end with this quote from the Google Building Secure and Reliable Systems book. This is where we're ultimately aiming for with this paved path library and tooling work we're doing. We want our customers' customers, the users, to mostly not need to keep headspace for us. We want our customers to know where to turn to when they have specific needs, but we want the general case to be taken care of by default. Thank you very much.
Kelly, thanks so much. I've got to take my monitor out. I listen to the talks while they're running. It is super confusing sometimes hearing yourself in Zoom latency. Great presentation, though. We haven't had a lot of questions come in from attendees. There's 58 still on, it looks like, with us. So if you have questions for Kelly, questions on Twitter, stuff, please do surface those. Otherwise, I've just a few questions before we kind of transition into the panel, because this almost it felt like a culture talk a little bit. Like you're just telling kind of the bottom up technical story of how Twitter implemented things like guardrails and paved road, which are two of the concepts that we really talk about a lot in DevOps, like making things easier. And then also when somebody does the wrong thing, they kind of like bounce off this guardrail, and that service isn't able to actually be deployed in a vulnerable way.
Yeah, exactly. So I come from more of like a DevOps and engineering background, and so that's what I was familiar with. And so when I joined this team, folks were really excited about that and were super open to me being like, what about if we kind of took what we had, which is already pretty good, and we built it up so that it's just like people don't have to scratch their heads as much, and like, just make it easier on folks. And so that's what we've been trying to do.
Yeah, and I think good tooling is the way that we really do that, right? And
Yes.
Just kind of making it more transparent, like what the tools do, easier to simulate. And I think you gave a lot of good examples in that talk, even though it was really specific to Twitter and Twitter scale. You had a lot of that content present. There was a question that came in that's like, how do you, let's see, how do you build that into SDLC? Like, how do you balance this desire for features against security, and like how do you work that into your SDLC type process?
So like I mentioned, we have touch points throughout the SDLC, right? So folks will come to us with their design documents, and then we can give feedback and help them in threat modeling and so forth, and say, oh, okay, this is actually, you should really bake in these 3 kind of more secure things that we have that you can use. And so that's one thing that we do. Of course, we also have tooling that you can use along the way, which is more what I was talking about. And then, we'll hack you later. So if things get into production, we will do our best to find them, and we'll do our best to help you fix them as well. So
sure. And I would imagine at like Twitter's scale, at a certain point, you're having the same problems that everybody else is having. And once you grow beyond a certain size, it's kind of just the same problem and scaling that out. But would you say that there's anything that's like particularly interesting, like with regard to the just the size, or is it that you're just doing the same process? Like you're just kind of out there shoveling every day to bring it back to the tractor analogy?
Yeah, I mean, some part of it is definitely the shoveling. But like the thing for me that really stood out was like, even like a couple of years ago for us, like we could think on more of like a service by service basis more easily and go, okay, right. So, we have this one application that this ads team runs, is that secure? And really what we needed to be thinking about is every application the ads team runs doing okay? And beyond that, like, where are we like at Twitter scale, like of all of the API routes that we expose, which ones are, safe from this particular thing to the best of our knowledge? And like, that's the kind of stuff that we're really interested in at this point.
Yeah, that really kind of resonates with me as far as like kind of what I think. And I think one of the things we're going to try to underscore with all this is that these problems are hard and they take a long time to really solve and do well, and that there's not really like a quick fix. Like you really have to kind of put in the work, and it's as much a sociology problem as it is a technical problem. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the important thing is you have to iterate and you have to be willing to work with people. And like, I saw a tweet about this last night. I don't remember who it was from actually, but they were like, if everyone doesn't like working with security, then, we're kind of hosed. Like, I don't remember the exact wording, but that was kind of my takeaway. Like, we gotta be, we have to be kind of top of mind for folks when they do have a problem. Like, oh yeah, I need to like get security on this so they can help me with this, as opposed to security is terrifying, I never want to talk to them, which is totally an anti-pattern.
Yeah. So we're just about at time here, and there's no other questions that come in. So I kind of want to just go straight into the panel here. Unless you have any final thoughts that you'd like to kind of share with folks. Thanks again for the great talk. I know you spent a lot of time kind of working on it with us. So happy to have it.
It was fun, and thank you. Thank you.
So panelists, if you want to decloak, that's great. Look at all of you. So many people.
That is the best hat.
I love Laurent's hat because
it's amazing.
It obviates like kind of needing to care for the flyers in the hair, right? Like I ever since I saw that hat, I'm like, I need a hat.
Like every day is a good hair day for me. So
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen you used in your presentations as well.
It's a consistent on brand for Laurent for sure. I think it's been every event. You look so consistent. But we're here. We had a few questions come in. Once again, we're here for you to like answer your questions. We have kind of a few topics here that we've kind of got in mind for this. But if you want to ask questions, or even just poke in the chat to let us know that you're still here with us. We've got a lot of folks on the call. Like, just even let us know you're still out there and you're still watching the chat series here. I think a great place to start here would be, kind of like what do you see as far as like the talent shortage? So let's just talk real briefly about the talent shortage in InfoSec, and like broader, security engineering, like all the disciplines kind of in this business, and what we're seeing from a hiring perspective and kind of being able to recruit people to this field. Are you finding it challenging, not challenging, super challenging? Who wants to start?
All right,
I can go ahead if you want.
Silence.
Looks like
ahead,
Laura's got
Let's go with Laura
here.
Yeah.
All right. That's fair. I haven't found it super difficult. I think part of it is actually, I think a lot of attracting people to the industry is culture. I think historically InfoSec has this reputation of being maybe like not the friendliest culture. And I think, the more we can do to change that, the better. And I think events like today actually really, really help. I see Kelly's nodding like mad. And, from your perspective at your specific company, like making sure that you have a good culture and that you advertise it. I think one of the jobs of any kind of engineering leader is to market their company as a good place to work. So, anything you can do to help with that. Conference talks are a good way to do it too, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Laura said. And I will add to culture, which, well, it's I would say it's the most important thing. Actually, today I was actually speaking before the conference about this with the CTO of our company. Actually telling him like the reason I'm in the company is because of the culture, the people, the way everything works. If not, I guess any of us could be working another place, and we decide to be where we are because like we enjoy it. And in addition to that, would be in terms of the shortage, at least what we are doing here in South America, and what I've been talking with people from Europe and US as well in other companies. It's okay, like maybe finding cybersecurity people right from the beginning could be difficult for a specific position. But what we're doing here is trying to take people from computer engineering or computer science degrees and teaching them, like starting to teaching them. So it's easier, like to create a culture and like just giving them challenges. I mean, they can solve problems. So as well, they can solve things in security and are able to think. So the idea is that try to root them and give them the different path they can pick, and just be there to coach them. And that has worked with us really, really well.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thank you for all the panelists for participating in this great event. We're super happy to have you, and thanks for everyone who's been attending. I agree with Laura and Santiago. I think I'm going to add, the only thing I have to add is that as security professionals, we tend not to make it easy on ourselves. If we look at a lot of the job postings that I see out there, we add a bunch of requirements and a bunch of gates for people to not apply. Or we write a job description that equates 3 people for just one role, right? It's like we want somebody to be 10 years of experience in Kubernetes and 20 years of cloud experience, and then try to find people who meet that. So something that I think us need to be more actively involved in solving.
Let's just talk about this concept of like a software integrity supply chain job. Like, this is a role that hasn't really even existed in our industry until very recently, right? So we have to be open to creative fits, right?
Is the requirement for that is basically being familiar with the previous incidents that kind of led to it? Because I think that's kind of how do we define it, right?
Yeah, I guess it's for me, it's like more about passion, like, because people come to this discipline, the security discipline, and I'm a big fan of like Mike Murray. I don't know if anybody's ever watched Mike Murray speak. He used to be CTO over at Lookout. He talks about how rare it is for somebody to work in security for a certain amount of time. I forget if it was like 3 years or 5 years, but most people aren't career security people. It's very, very rare. The way they come to this discipline is out of necessity and passion for solving a specific problem. And I think supply chain, which is the focus of this, is kind of one of those things where if you say, this really has the potential to be massively impactful for our industry if we don't figure this out. It's a hard problem to solve. Let's figure it out. You're going to get a variety of candidates.
Yeah, I mean that's true. We're actively hiring for a lot of that, and if we look for somebody who understands the depth of software integrity and open source supply chain and all the complexities that happen there, you might have a talent pool of 2 people. And I think what we're focusing on is hiring people who can solve problems, who can execute, and then they can learn this problem space and execute on it. So trying to turn the problem a little bit around there. And passion is something that I'll throw this out to the panelists as well. Like, I think passion is something that comes after getting good at something. I don't think it's something you develop in the beginning. A lot of people join security because they know it's a hot market and they want to get paid and they have food to bring to the table. So somebody who's passionate about solving problems can possibly and hopefully be good at solving security problems, right? So maybe somebody who's good at solving problems is already passionate about it. But you don't start with passion. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, Kelly, Peter, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this was touched on, but I think a big thing that we've done is look at hiring as like interviewing for traits and not skills. We're not interviewing for years of experience. We're looking for traits, and then we're thinking about what we can do to enable them. We think about it as a factory to produce really talented security analysts or engineers. And that's how we've approached this problem. And we approached it about 4 or 5 years ago that way. And so we've built a lot of infrastructure internally to enable that. It allows us to hire out of non-traditional schools. We don't have to compete salary-wise with the likes of the Twitter or Datadog, for example, as a scrappy startup. And we can find really talented people and grow them. And then when we think about the culture we want to build, we celebrate. We think about it as a promotion when they're ready to get off of shift or take a change. We don't think about it as a loss. And those mindset shifts have such a substantial impact to culture, and they have such a substantial impact on people's lives. We've hired folks out of trade schools, welders, things like that, because we're looking at traits and behaviors, and we know we can help them with the skill piece, and it kind of also helps with diversity. So it's been for us a journey over the past 4 or 5 years, and like this involves re-educating your workforce and bias. You actually have to train how to do behavioral interviewing, the like tests that are the Silicon Valley tests don't actually help with the behavioral piece. They can actually alienate. And so like making sure that you train that out of people as they come in from other companies, like it's a very concerted, intentional effort. But if you do it, you have some really amazing results, and you get to meet some really amazing people.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Peter said, and regarding the passion aspect that Emilio mentioned, I have two different optics or views about that, which is first, well, I'm usually talking in Clubhouse with a group of people, and we are, for example, on Tuesday we talk about application security, like, well, today, this evening, and so I talked, for example, with a girl from Amazon. She's called Tiran, really good girl. And she's like, what we realize is that people, at least in application security, which is at least my focus, are really passionate about the field. Like they really like to contribute, to share stories, to learn more. And what I found interesting is I never thought about when do you start developing that passion. In my case, it was when I started hacking at a really young age. In Tiran's case, which is the girl from Amazon, it was when she moved into cybersecurity and she realized, oh, this is really challenging. Like I want to solve problems. And the other radical, like the other view, or the other optic, it's my father. So my father spent 30 years, he's a computer engineer, but he spent 30 years doing special effects and for movies and TV shortcuts. And 2 years ago, he started hacking. So 30 years after finishing his computer engineering degree, like totally out of the blue, he started hacking. And yeah, and he's really liking it because it has to do with what Emilio said, solving problems. So he really likes challenges and solving problems. That's something that makes him passionate about the field. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of comments come in from the chat. Laron put in there junior supply chain security engineer, which is another one of those fun ones, because I think I'm like anyone who would apply for these jobs is probably a junior supply chain security engineer. You know, we're all just kind of like coming in right at the beginning of kind of this wave of stuff, and we really like solving problems. We're about halfway through our time allocated, so I want to kind of shift that topic. But there's a lot of love for the stories being told here. So there's a perception, I guess, that exists in the industry that I think that we could do well to combat, which is that developers don't want to do the right thing. It's like this adversarial kind of finger pointing relationship where somebody's pointing the finger at security and saying, you're making me do this, and security is saying, you must do this. And I've been in meetings where folks have said, you know, I'll say something like, the best person to defend the application is the person who built it. If we just show them how to care, they will care. And I mean, this applies a fair bit to like databases and like safeguarding data warehouses too, right? Like something to the credit of the Expel talk. But this is dichotomous. Like people disagree about the intent of the engineering teams all the time. So just kind of like curious to hear perceptions and like what works well from this group.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, like, I want to start from the perspective of the user is not bad, the developer is not bad. Like, the user wants a good experience and the developer wants to do the right thing. And if we start from that place, we can kind of build a shared understanding and work toward, you know, like they don't want their thing to be broken. Like, that's ridiculous. So, like, I mean, sometimes they might always not understand, like, if you're like, I found an SSRF in your application, like, they don't, like, they might know that word, but maybe not like what that actually means in terms of like real life. And so you kind of have to show them and, you know, bridge the jargon gap. And I think once you do get there, it's fine. But like, I think there's definitely a point where for security folks, you're like, this is the word I use to describe this. And then the developer is like, so as long as you don't stop there, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
One thing I think is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go, Laura.
I was going to say, I think we can actually learn a lot from lawyers on this, which might seem like the weirdest thing to say. But both security engineering teams and your legal department at your company are sometimes referred to as the department of no, right? Like, and people will try and route around you because it's easier than working with you, they think. And something I've learned from working with really good lawyers actually is that you want to become, the person that doesn't say, no, you can't do that, but the person who says, here's how to do that. So you're kind of like an enabler and a coach. And so you do actually save the no, you can't do that for the time when it really is a hard no. And so when people hear that, they know that you mean it. But most of the time, you're actually someone who can help. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think it's also like about they kind of developers want to build their things, and generally they kind of want everything else to get out of their way, right? This is also us. This is very understandable. So I would think it's how could we make security more part of what they're basically day-to-day stuff, and try to get them over on this like not triaging 500 vulnerabilities, not pinging on every little thing, not spamming them and flooding them with so many security asks, but rather putting them on this kind of like paved road, this guardrail of, this is kind of like how you should do things. And it's okay to like maybe, go, between the lanes, but overall, like this is, an overarching, kind of like guidance. And so I think once you do that, then there's like more of like I like Peter's kind of notion of celebrating security and like that like really empowering culture of where this is, it's not a blaming culture. That's like, this is us together trying to fix something. And once this is more of that mindset, I think that, everything changes from that point on.
Yeah, it has to do with what Kelly said as well. I mean, definitely culture has a big importance here. Because at least what happened to us is, so we don't want to come to them, to the developers and the engineering managers with thousands of vulnerabilities and like, okay, I gave you 500 vulnerabilities, 50, so you need to solve them and put them in your sprints, and so it doesn't make sense. So our approach is, okay, first we started fixing everything and sealing the infrastructure, then focusing on fixing the critical vulnerabilities and medium ones, and then we start from the bottom to the top. So the idea is that now we are teaching developers about application security. So the idea that from straight from the beginning on the setup, when they start building the applications, they think about security, like developers itself, because as Kelly mentioned, they don't want their applications broken. They want them to be like, when we are doing penetration testings and assessments, they're like, okay, who won? Did we won? I even had a score with one team 2 years ago, and they were like, I was like, it was 2-0. I was 0. They were winning by 2 because I couldn't find a secret in their code in a Golang binary. And well, like now what's happening, which it's a mixture between culture and this onboarding we are doing as soon as developers get into in the enterprise, is that people really like doing things securely, and they will think, it's not that both teams, like the developers and us, work in a proactive manner, and they would reach out to us when they are developing something. They will say, hey, we're thinking about this solution for this security aspect. What do you think? Is it good, or do you have any recommendation? So it's now them, like we have several Slack channels with different teams, and it's now them that would come to us. So that makes a really important difference in terms of approaching security and solving problems, because it's not like you are running after them and you're like the bad guy is like, hey, I'm gonna put your, like, you would need to stop working on what you're doing and you need to fix this. It's like they come before. So that helps us a lot, like culture plus teaching people, because they want to learn. They don't want their application broken. They want to learn. And we have a really good culture in the enterprise. So that's kind of, I guess, resumes my position or what I can contribute.
It would actually have been super interesting for today to ask attendees if we had a little more data collection on the forum to tell us whether they were coming to this event from a development role or a pure security role. Because I mean, feel free to let us know in the chat if you want to let us know, like, whether your role is purely focused on security or your role is like kind of any role that's not pure security, because that's an interesting data point. Because I think that the more of the events like this I do, the more I'm talking to folks who are not kind of identifying as pure security staff, because there's an interest.
I'm definitely
Yeah.
not security engineering, right? It's a different team here. I did more of it at Mozilla and ran one of those teams there, but now I'm just like all in security is everybody's job, which I realize is a cliche, but it's true for everyone.
Yeah, I think too, it will be interesting to hear from the attendees where they are, security or engine or software dedicated. I think my only thing to add is if everyone in the company is only thinking about security, the company will not go anywhere, right? And one thing that I think security teams need to realize is that when we talk to engineers or developers, because we're all, software developer, product engineers, security is not the only concern that they have or the only priority that they have, right? They're fighting for resources just like we are. They have deadlines to meet. They have contractual agreements to meet. They have a product management team breathing down their neck to get features out the door. And here we come with a report with 500 vulnerabilities. Like, of course, they're going to tell us to, shut the front door, right? So we have to be more empathetic to that. So that's the only thing I need to add, because everyone else said it perfectly.
So with the time that we have left, because we have about 3 minutes left here in this very short panel, because we're kind of like a little compressed over time, and we need to end the event on time. I'd just actually like to do a round table, and I would like to hear your one thing based on this that you think that security teams should be focused on this year, and why. And I'll just call on you each in the panel, and then we can kind of round this out. And if there's questions, I'll surface those. But like, let's just do it, and we'll start. Kelly's at my top left, so let's just start with Kelly.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah, I guess for me, the thing that I'd like to see all of us do. Thank you, Laurent. The thing that I'd like to see all of us do is just to remember that we're partners, and we're not a gate. We're not the bad guy. We're not there to like. So, and I know that like there's been kind of a cultural shift overall toward that over the last few years, anyways. So.
All right. Next to my right is Emilio.
I think my advice for teams this year is to treat what you do as a product. So really look for one of the good things that product managers have is NPS, Net Promoter Score. Have your own Net Promoter Score within your organization and see what you score and fix the areas of friction that you're causing.
Next is Laurent.
Look at that. Okay, cool. I thought I'd escape it from the 3 minutes, but okay. So I'm going to choose two things because I'm weird like that. So first thing is celebrating security. I had to repeat that, and I think that's thinking that these are security wins, and this is something you should be happy for if you fixed a vulnerability or did anything else. But really, the one thing that you do as a takeaway, I think, is thinking about how you could fix security in the way that is probably the most easiest and like most friendly way for you, right? This is the thing that adapts to you, and I think that is the future of security tooling. That is things that are there to enable you to move fast without trying to get you crazy and doing different things that are not part of your workflows. So I think that would be probably like the next revolution, we'll say.
After Laurent, and my panel is Laura.
Hello. So things to think about in 2021. I think one of the biggest things is anything you can do to make your processes inherently safer, because everybody is under probably a little more stress than average. I know a lot of people have said things like, this is not the job that I signed up for. I say you're an engineering manager. I didn't sign up to be an engineering manager in a pandemic because it's about 5 times as hard. Developers make more mistakes because they're stressed. Everybody makes more mistakes because they're stressed. So anything you can do to give people guardrails is going to be a good thing.
Dan.
I don't know if you saw my eyes go like this when you said you were going to call on everybody. Yeah, panic immediately ensued. Yeah, I think the thing for me is just understanding that like security is a journey, right? And every organization is different and at a different stage in that journey. And like we always hear in the news and like hear in talks and conferences, all the cool stuff, all the cutting edge stuff, all the like really sophisticated and cool attacks. But like not all that stuff is the most relevant thing that you need to solve like for you right now. Like understand where you are, take small steps to get better and progress on that journey, but don't go buy the cool next shiny object, right? Focus on the thing that's really gonna impact you.
Next is Santiago, and then we'll wrap up with Peter.
Cool. Yeah. So I think I would focus. It's something I could do like every year, not this year, but something that came to my mind is what we were talking about culture. Like I think culture, it's as I said, 90%. If you create an enterprise that has a culture of like enjoying the challenges of having your product secure, and like from the beginning, it's great. It's great because you get them to have productivity as well. We are having. I think maybe it was Dan who mentioned metrics, or well, so we have some engineering metrics in which we count the vulnerabilities, like from the C levels. They count the vulnerabilities each team has, and it's in a dashboard that everyone can see it. So of course they are the ones that like no one wants to have like with the team having more vulnerabilities, so they want to develop even more secure. So, well, culture, I would just sum up to just focus on having a good culture. So you develop a place in which developers and engineers, like managers, they want to come to you and easily ask you questions, debate with you, and be open to anything. Yeah.
I think I'll grab a little bit from everyone. I think making sure that we think about security as being a team sport, which means you have to involve everybody and you can't assume intention. And I'd call out to kind of piggyback on what my friend Dan said. There are different leagues and different levels of expertise. And so you don't have to be in the majors to care about it being a team sport and win or maintain a certain culture or posture. I think, the key thing is just remembering it's a team of people who have a lot going on as well.
So for all the attendees that are left, all 41 of you that are left here at the end of the call, I want you to note that not a single industry leader on this panel said that the thing that you should most be concerned about is a single technology. It was almost 100% culture answers, which I think is the thing to note about the year that we live in. We almost have all the technology that we need. Liron saying, no, wait, but what about the blockchain? But quite seriously, most of the problems that we need to solve is actually like socialization problems and process problems and culture problems, like to break down these barriers that we have built up inside of our org. And when we select tools, when we select process, when we select the methods by which we go to solve these things, it's important that we take that into consideration. And with that, I think we need to transition to a product demo here. But I'll thank all of our panelists, thanks everybody for all of your hard work and time that you spent on this event. It's been a great event. We're gonna move to the product demo. It's 6 minutes long. So if you're still here, please stay for the 6-minute demo. And you can ask a question or two of Justin, who will be here as well to answer any questions about detection and response. Thanks all.
Let's continue to talk about Datadog security and compliance monitoring. Our security monitoring product adds real-time threat detection. The goal is to bring together developers, operations, and security into a unified platform. Bringing in compliance monitoring, Datadog now continuously monitors for misconfigurations and security issues. This includes out-of-the-box support for PCI and CIS across your AWS resources, hosts, containers, and Kubernetes clusters. We can now continue to bring together compliance teams with security and operations teams. Security monitoring leverages 400 plus existing integrations across different cloud providers. This way, you can tap into your existing observability data across your entire stack for both detection and investigation. Security and compliance monitoring provides out-of-the-box rules curated by Datadog. This means you can get started with Datadog in minutes. You can customize these or easily write your own without learning a proprietary query language. With security and compliance, you gain observability across your infrastructure, your cloud configurations, and your containerized applications. You can detect security issues and quickly investigate problems by correlating all security data with your metrics, traces, and logs. We built security and compliance on top of the Datadog's observability platform. Because of this, we can offer heads-up detection. And with Logging Without Limits, we analyze all ingested logs for security issues. But you can continue to only index what you want and what you need. Let's now take a look at one of our dashboards. With Datadog, you can view all of your metrics, traces, and logs, security, and compliance signals on one dashboard. You can see the overview dashboard showing many different key performance indicators across your entire application, including your security and compliance team. No longer do you have to switch products to see all of these in one location. You can even visualize very granular data, such as authentication events, on the same dashboard. Now let's take a deep dive on security and compliance. What you're looking at here are signals. Each signal is an indicator of a potential attack, anomaly, or misconfiguration. The Security Explorer lets you search and correlate signals by security-relevant information, such as their severity. They're also tied to associated entities, for example, the actor conducting the attack, like the username or IP, or their target, like the hostname or application. In this case, a rule has detected that a brute force attack might have succeeded on a user account. The signal contains detailed information to help me triage it. In particular, I can see the timeline of the suspected attack. The rule is first triggered as soon as it detects a malicious pattern. Then it keeps updating the signal for as long as the event keeps triggering it, so I can see when the attack was last seen for this user. The security monitoring product evaluates the detection rules, which provides real-time threat detection over ingested logs. Rules are how we generate security signals for attacks, anomalies, and misconfigurations. This is an example of a detection rule which is provided out of the box. We provide numerous out-of-the-box rules in addition to detect widespread attacker techniques and misconfigurations, allowing you to get started in minutes. I'm also able to dive into some of the events that triggered the signal. This signal looks fairly suspicious, so I'm going to notify my team to take a deeper look. I can share this signal directly from the Security Explorer with my team on Slack or any of the other Datadog integrations such as Jira and ServiceNow. But security monitoring is about more than just detecting attacks. We want to also try to prevent them. To do this, we want to find misconfigurations and compliance violations. Now that we're focused on our configuration and compliance signals, let's look at an example. As you can see, Datadog has identified a change in the security group that allows public access to a common Elasticsearch port. This is a risk since there is an attack running across the internet deleting publicly accessible Elasticsearch clusters. We need to get this resolved quickly. To help you manage compliance and fix misconfigurations, Datadog provides remediation instructions for compliance signals out of the box. With support for PCI and CIS across the cloud, your containers, and your Kubernetes clusters, you'll be up and running in minutes. Similarly, security monitoring provides out-of-the-box mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So to summarize, Datadog doesn't just detect threats anymore. You can detect, investigate, maintain compliance regulations, and have quick visibility into our default dashboards all in one place, giving your engineering team straightforward processes and saving time where it matters most.
All right, that is the product demo, and it is notably still a great demo for the Datadog product. I've got Justin Massey here on the line with me to answer any questions that you might have about the Datadog product. But like, hey, how about, since we don't have any questions, you just tell us a little bit about what it's been like to evolve this product to Datadog over the last like year or so. I think we launched this. Has it even been a year?
What is a year in these pandemic times? I don't even know anymore. Yeah, it's been longer than a year because we were at AWS reInvent in 2019, announcing the beta of it, and then the security monitoring product went GA in the April of 2020. So I guess we're reaching a 1 year milestone on the on that actual GA launch. But yeah, it's been great. I mean, when I started at Datadog, I was not a security engineer, or I wasn't a product manager here. I was actually working to defend our application, and I was using our Datadog logging product, and we were using logging to detect different attacks. And then there was the opportunity to enter into the security space and detect attacks for our customers. So it's been fun to see it kind of come full circle, and it's been great to see this product evolve.
Yeah, getting a lot of feedback on the talks, not a lot of questions about the product itself. I personally think one of the coolest things about the product itself is that it runs the security rules in real time as kind of the logs are ingested, so you can kind of write rules for anything. You can do a lot of quick and easy kind of detections that you couldn't do in other platforms.
Yeah, I mean, we see majority of our customers using it for the out of the box use cases, but then we see some customers that have some more advanced use cases or business logic attacks that they want to use that are very specific to their application, and we've made it flexible enough to do that. And it's really cool to see your product used in ways that you never even anticipated it. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, if people do have questions, I'm happy to. I can screen share and kind of show some more detailed things in the product if we wanted to do that. But yeah, happy to just sit here and chat while people think of anything.
Any of the remaining attendees, if you have questions about the product, capabilities, questions for Justin, questions on the weather, lunch, what happens next today, happy to answer those. Otherwise, we're gonna wrap up here in about 1 minute or so, unless there are any questions.
I'll tell you, the weather is fantastic in New York City today.
It is fantastic here in Southern Oregon as well. Like, we're looking to hit 70-degree kind of temperatures. It's definitely trending towards warmer weather very rapidly. So glad to see that. All right. It doesn't look like there's any active chat. There's no active Q&A. Thanks for being here. Real quick, Justin, and for the product demo. Thanks, Jacqueline, for moderating the chat all day long. And thanks to all the attendees and speakers, of course, for being here. And with that, we will close out the event.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.